welcome to Final Resonance TV, my YouTube channel.
My new video series called How to Play the Guitar.
Alright, I thought I'd do a day of video for the Space Donkey show tonight at Mars Music Hall. Crazy story about Eddie Van Halen that was going on in the internet. You know, I'm a huge Van Halen fan.
This is my attempt to spread some of the knowledge that I've gained through 30 years in the music business.
Jeff Goebel.
Hey.
Thank you for coming, sir. I appreciate it.
Of course.
I've known you for a while, I guess. I mean, not intimately, but I think you're one of the first bands I saw up here when I first moved up here back in, I guess it was 2011 is when I first came up here. It was Space Donekys.
Space Donekys, yeah.
And then the second band I think I saw was Black Label.
Or Black Eyed Susan, you mean, yeah.
Well, it was Black Label.
Okay, you saw Black Label then, okay.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Before them.
Yeah, sure.
So anyway, I want to have you on. I know your background, but I want to hear you talk about it, so I'm not going to give a big introduction to you. We're going to find out who you are.
Okay.
Right here. First, I want to go over your childhood. I know you grew up in Birmingham, right?
Mostly, yeah. I mean, my parents were, I was born in Illinois, outside of Chicago, south of Chicago, in a place called Geneva, Illinois. And then Geneva and St. Charles are like these bordering towns. So that was where I started life. And then we moved around to Cleveland and back down to the south is when we ended up in Marietta in the Atlanta area, and then Columbia, South Carolina, and then eventually in Birmingham. And so I grew up my high school years in Birmingham, and then ended up here in the mid-'90s for work.
Okay.
And always played since I was in Birmingham. I started in, about 82, 83 is when I started getting interested in music.
Yeah.
And then started bands after that and kind of, been playing since that point. So,
well, I guess that ruins my question I was going to have because, Goebel, being German, not descent, everybody here in this area from German descent usually has something to do with grandparents or something from Operation Paperclip and everything.
Oh, yeah. No.
So that's not you.
No, my father's family came to the United States in 1899 and around that, and that's why we were in Illinois, because they were in southern Illinois in a place called Newton, Illinois, which is total farm town.
Yeah,
my dad grew up on a farm, and then all of our descendants were over here far before all that period. So none of them are from that. Although I'm very aware of the whole, all of that and the history behind it. Yeah.
So growing up, I've heard and read that your mom kind of influenced you a little bit to start piano.
Yeah.
That was kind of like your first.
Yeah. My mom and my mom's sister were both play piano. And my sister started to play too when I started to play guitar roughly around the same time. So yeah, they were the first people in the family that I knew that played. And that's kind of where she kept trying to get me to do it, trying to get me to play piano or whatever. And I just, for some reason, the piano didn't click for me. I mean, I liked it and I liked music, and I had uncles who were a little older. So they were the ones that kind of introduced me to rock and roll, Kiss and all that when I was a kid. So I kind of first, when my parents were playing stuff in their house, it would be soft rock, John Denver and that kind of thing. ABBA was big back then,
Right.
So those were kind of like, I guess, the melodic stuff.
I've just been introduced back to ABBA. When people say ABBA, I'm like, what are y'all talking about? And then they're like, well, you don't like ABBA? I'm like, no. And then I started going back and listening. I'm like, yeah, that's actually pretty good.
Yeah, well, the guys are very classically trained, I believe, and you hear a lot of that kind of thing in their music, which is a very interesting mix. And the melodicism of it kind of stuck in my head like it did. It was a big hit, obviously, with the whole world. So it stuck with me too. And that was kind of like melodically, as I was growing up as a musician, I probably didn't realize this, but at this point when I'm not playing anything, that this stuff is going to kind of get in my head and influence my melodic sense at that point. So yeah, that happened, and then rock and roll happened, and after I saw Kiss, man, I was like, what the heck? And then of course Van Halen, which is the big thing. So
yeah, so like growing up that young, starting piano and then knowing that you want to be a guitar, I mean, was your aspiration? I mean, when I was growing up, that I had no idea what I was going to do. I didn't even have plans. It wasn't even talked about in my household. What are you going to do when you grow up? But What was that something? As soon as you picked up the guitar, you was like, "Well, that's what I'm going to do forever." Or was there? Did you have other plans?
Yeah,
or?
I was just watching TV one night. I tell the story all the time on my podcast.
Yeah.
It's such a flashpoint for me as far as my life goes. I was watching this show called Don Kirshner's Rock Concert, which is a pre-MTV show, and they would show artists on there, and like Midnight Special was another one of those shows. But Don Kirshner's had David Lee Roth being interviewed, just like me and you sitting here right now.
Wow.
And he was being interviewed, and I didn't know who he was. And I had, we had a 20-inch TV, you could hold it in your hand, small, right?
Yeah.
In our living room. So it was late at night, and I was watching this, and I hit this channel, 4 channels, your 3 plus the public broadcast system, right? So I catch this one channel, and David Lee Roth's on there. I'm thinking, who is this guy? This guy's, long blonde hair guy with these riding pants on, and he's just different. And of course, how he is, this comedian almost. And so it stuck with me. And then Van Halen had a video that came on after this. So they introduced a video. And the video was this song Unchained. And that became, it was a big song on the previous album. And they'd been on tour. And this was a live video of this concert. Yeah. And for some reason at that moment, man, that was like, that's what I want to do with my life. I want to do what they're doing. And I just saw the joy and fun and music all of a sudden, and it really clicked.
I wonder what kids these days think of MTV, or even if they even know. I mean, I'm sure probably the 30 and 40-year-olds probably know, but like the 20-year-olds, I mean, if they even know how MTV was back then, it was nothing but videos.
Yeah,
that's all it was.
It's kind of like radio was. You had a consistent diet of the same music from everybody. You know what? Mm-hmm. Like for us, we all heard the same music. Like if you were wherever you were, you would be watching the same videos I'm watching. Yeah. And that created this really tight community experience that we had, that we all saw the same things. Now it's so segmented. There's so many different things that we don't, I mean, maybe they do with Taylor Swift. She has this thing where she's got a huge following. And I guess if you were going to equate what happened with like those bands in that period, Kiss, Van Halen, you could, if you were younger, like now in your 20s, Taylor Swift would be the equivalent of what we would see in the 80s. Yeah. That kind of following, that kind of energy and excitement around an artist. But that wasn't, it wasn't as rare as Taylor Swift is now.
Yeah. Well, videos was so important back then. If you had a halfway decent song and a horrible video, it's almost like you never even, because you had that stuck in your mind of the video, how crappy the video was. You didn't even want to listen to the music almost,
Right, or the other way around.
Exactly,
right.
Or the other way around. It could be a crappy song, but man, remember that video? And then it just became popular.
Well, the videos, that really, it was a thing to do after school, right? So like I'd get, we went from Scooby-Doo and all that in the afternoons and Brady Bunch or whatever we watch in the afternoons to watching MTV in our teens. Because when I was younger, of course, I'd be watching the Brady Bunch and all those things in the afternoon after school. But then when MTV hit, it was MTV, man.
Right.
We were going and the thing for me was that cable wasn't in every neighborhood at the time, and not everybody had MTV.
You're right.
So
we had to go to your buddy's house.
Yeah. So you had that afternoon thing.
You had like 5 or 6 kids over there at your house because he's the only one that had cable.
Right.
So I forgot to do something in the beginning, so I'm going to do it right here.
Sure, go ahead.
So I really screwed this up.
That's all right.
But this season, we're giving T-shirts away to anybody that comes on here.
Awesome.
So you have the choice of either gray or
I always go for darker.
So this is on the front, and that's on the back.
Okay, so I'll take the dark one.
There you go.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Kenny Bush.
Mm-hmm. Kenny Bush.
Kenny Bush, is he still with us?
Yeah.
How much influence did he have on you?
He was a huge influence on me. My guitar teacher, man.
Yeah.
That guy. When I first started playing guitar, it was and I did. A lot of people say this. Their initial teacher is a very, they just teach kind of out of a book.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no freedom for you to request what you'd like to learn. And that was kind of the situation I was in, doing class as acoustic with like 20 people. And we were all learning the same Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star,
Sure.
whatever it was, This is not, something that I was inspired to play by Van Halen, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am in these classes. And then somehow my mom found Kenny Bush, and she said, I got you the teacher. And she takes me down to this Miller violin shop, which is kind of strange, but they said sell some guitars, but their specialty was not only selling classical instruments, but it was repairing them. And
Okay.
Kenny was a luthier already as a young man, and he would repair instruments. Then he would teach guitar lessons on the side. He was a rock guitarist, obviously, still is. And but he was younger. He was closer to our age. He was in his 20s, and that gave us this kinship where he understood what would inspire me and my friends, And I had a friend that I told you about earlier, the bass player, that had taken his life. He was my lesson partner, and my mom would take us, and he would do 30 minutes with Kenny, and then I would do 30 minutes with Kenny, and we would learn the same songs. And he's playing bass. So he's learning the bass parts. Then I go in and learn the guitar parts from Kenny. And then we get together in our garage and we play Iron Maiden or whatever we're learning that week.
So was that the formation of Midnight Sun?
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
great.
pretty much. I mean, there was a band right before it that was called, we called it Distortion at one point, High Voltage at another point. And Matt, my buddy that I'm telling you about, the bass player, he was always in these bands with me because he was just my friend who I kind of like talked into playing the bass,
Right.
And he wanted to be part of it. He enjoyed it. And, but yeah, Midnight Sun became another friend of mine. Greg Griffin was his name. And Tommy Popey was the drummer. And we kind of had a three-piece at first. And then we added a female singer who happened to be my girlfriend at the time, who could actually, she was really pretty good as a young, teen. And we had our first band, and we started writing our own music right away. And of course, covering songs right away. And so we did a little bit of stuff that we do today, even, some Journey and Van Halen, of course. But yeah, it was cool. That was a memorable time for me.
Sure.
In high school, being in a band. There was only one other band in town, or in the school, I should say. In high school, there was only one other band, and they were called The Trip. And the guy that was the kind of leader was named Jeff as well. And he was sort of an honor student at Pelham High School, where I went to school. And they would play, and we actually played dances together as we would switch up or whatever. And later on, like 30 years later, Jeff becomes a producer of Deadliest Catch, I think it was.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
And he was, up for an award on that. What do you call it? Not Grammy. What's the TV one?
I don't know.
Academy, not Academy. One of those. Anyway, he was nominated, and I went out to L.A. to do a podcast episode with him, and I interviewed my buddy after 35 years.
Wow.
And we go back through all of those early formation days and, how he comes to be a TV person in Burbank, California. So, yeah.
So going through high school, having your own bands and everything, I imagine at some point you either finished high school or college or whatever and started working, 9-to-5 jobs.
Yep.
I'm sure, not even knowing, but I'm sure just by talking to that you had bands while you're doing the whole corporate gig and everything, right?
Of course, yeah. I started out like everybody started out with. We started out with our entry-level job. My first job in high school was probably Taco Bell. I did that for a minute. And then my mom she worked on a construction company, and they were building like apartment complexes and condominiums. So she would get me some work in the summertime. And it's first time, this is a funny story, I like to tell it, but first job she got me was like watering grass to this complex.
That's
right?
awesome.
Right? I mean, it's the middle of the summer, I'm in my shorts and I'm watering grass.
Shoot, I'd do that now.
Right? And I'm just moving the hoses around and that's all I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
And then the winter comes and she goes, we got a new job for you. And I'm like, really? And she's like, yeah, it's called general laborer. And I'm like,
isn't that what I'm doing already?
I was like, what is that? Coming to find out, that's where you clean up after all the construction, and all you do is kind of like, you're just more like a janitorial service for the construction site. You're cleaning up all day long. So I did that, much harder work, and I learned a lot from doing that. But yeah, then of course after that, probably Yeah, this is where I hit the music store and everything. I start working at a music store.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, at some point, I'm sure whether it was a specific moment or just a period of time that you went from, I won't call it a hobby, but not your primary source of income and passion, I guess. So I'm just wondering, at what point in your life that you was like, you know what, I'm going to take this a lot more serious, and I'm going to focus on this, and this is what I'm going to do, whether I succeed or not. I'm putting all my cards on the table here.
Yeah, well, that kind of went back and forth because of the financial situation.
Sure.
So in the early days, I was in this high school band. I was very committed to it. We wanted to write our own music and all of that and do the whole thing. But of course, everybody in high school doesn't always go on to do that. That they chose to do different things with their lives. And as we went out of high school, I had a more serious band, which became my first club band, which was called Panda Bang Wangas, which is a big mouthful. Panda Bang Wangas, which happens to still be back. We got back together about 5 years ago.
So same
yeah, all but one. Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
okay.
So it's pretty wild. So anyway, that band started playing professionally. We started making money. And that's right when I turned 21, just when I was of age. And maybe even a little bit before that. We were playing some gigs before that. But we were real serious. We worked as much as we could, playing gigs. And we would open up for people. And there was a band out of Birmingham called Vallejo Brothers, which became pretty popular band, got a record deal. And we would open up for them. And Brother Kane, which is, it was before called Child. We opened up for them. So we were kind of in the thick of the music scene in the early 90s or late 80s, early 90s. And I'm in my early 20s. And so I'm pretty serious at that point. I'm working like at Hibbett's at one point through that. And then I moved into an original band in the second part, like 91, 92, called Relics. And this band was a real serious original band that wanted to get a record deal. We had a guy who was, and I just written about this last week, that he was a child prodigy. His mother was half Japanese, and she taught him piano when he was like in like
2 or 3,
6, right. Maybe even 4, 6. I can't remember exactly when this was that he was taught that, but I knew he was taught from he was a tot, And so this Jamie Robertson was his name. Jamie was such a talented guy that I had seen his band when I was in my high school bands. And these guys were already as good as any band that was professional.
Sure.
You hear this a lot about, like, even with Van Halen. They were so good at such a young age that when I saw these guys play, I was like, dang, they sound just like the record, and they're only like kids.
Yeah, it's almost like, are you guys playing something back here through the speakers and just... obviously, we've all seen bands like that. You're like, is that real? Because this sounds exactly
they were kids,
like
man.
it.
They were like 16 years old. They were so young it didn't compute. And come to find out, Jamie being this prodigy, he was also a songwriter, and he had written all these great songs. By the time he was in his mid-teens, like 16, 17, he was writing songs that were as good as Bon Jovi's songs on the radio.
Yeah.
And I was like hearing these, they were playing them. And I was like shocked by how good he was. And we had our little band in high school that did original music. And somehow my tape got into Jamie's hands, and I ended up working with him at this music store. And then we got real serious about going after a record deal, having all this original music that was really, I thought, could compete. And I'm in my early 20s by this point. And so we're shopping record deals and everything, doing all kinds of radio and TV around town, and making some real quick progress. And but this is 92, right before Nirvana hit. And we were pretty much, I like to say we were a cross between like Loverboy and Journey. We had some similar crosses there. But the thing about Relics was that Jamie, being half Japanese, he had a very unique look. And all the women loved him.
Yeah.
So
that's always a good thing.
We knew that was a good thing, right?
A lot of following.
We knew he would be very accepted. And so anyway, we had a very unique thing going on there. And musically, I thought it was as good as anything that was out. But then Nirvana hit, and that kind of crushed that kind of music. And so I kind of was kind of left at that point with going back to work,
Mm.
and I went to work.
So did you just stop? I mean, playing?
Well,
did the band break up, or
pretty much, and then we got back together occasionally, but it wasn't anything like serious.
Yeah.
And then the whole period just kept sort of in a totally the wrong direction musically for us to do anything with what we were doing naturally. This is what we did naturally, and that's why I was in the band. I was a Journey fan, I lived and breathed those solos and that stuff. So, so that was a perfect fit for me as a guitar player.
Mm-hmm.
But so we ended up disbanding, and then I went to work. I had some people coming into the music store where I was working. A guy was a lot older than me, about 10 years older than me or so. I had these older guys, and they approached me about doing these house gigs over in Hueytown, Alabama, which is kind of on the west side of Birmingham, kind of more where the steel plants are and all that. And I started working on Thursdays, every Thursday for years. And that grew into every weekend at the American Legion for 10 years.
I was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
So here we don't mind what you talk about.
Yeah.
But I really want to hear some good stories about the American Legion.
Oh, God. Okay.
Because I know you have some.
No, of course.
And I don't know if you've actually shared them on your podcast.
No, I haven't. I haven't ever shared them. I share them with my wife.
But feel free.
My wife and I share them all the time.
Yeah.
Because we met around that period, so she would come there, and you got to remember with the American Legion, this is not really it's a strange situation, because this American Legion was this huge hall, right? And they have their normal bar,
sure,
right, for their members. But then at 11 p.m., it became a regular bar in the big room.
Okay, so it wasn't American Legion anymore.
Kind of right.
Open house.
It was they call back a private club. Back then, you had to sign in or something.
Yeah, they give you like a little ticket for 50 cents or something.
Basically, it's something like that, right? And so it started at 11. Well, actually, the first 5 years or so was 12 to 5, something like that.
Yeah, so we're talking 12 at night to 5 in the morning.
12, yeah.
Right.
So now you know why the stories start, because this is the place where people come after they get off work at bars, and
that's where people go when they're drunk and when I'm not done partying.
That's
and
right.
That bar closed. We got to find somewhere else to go.
That's exactly where it was in Bessemer, right?
That's why I want to hear the stories, because I know they're
party wise. I mean, as far as the stories go, you'd have like people come in because they came in at midnight, right? They're already hammered, and they would like come back the next night. They'd be wearing the same clothes they wore the night before, stuff like that. Or gosh, I mean, some of the stories are crazy.
So I'm sure there were striptease stuff going on. And
yeah, I mean, I can get into those stories. But yeah, there's a lot of offers that happen.
Yeah.
Those types of nights, and it'd be like, and I didn't really take anybody up on these offers, but
yeah.
But
so is that place still operating?
I don't know. I know it's still there, because we went back by there one time. We go to Birmingham. Sometimes we'll go by when we're in the neighborhood and just see if it's still there,
Yeah.
And
we ought to drop in to see what's going on.
I should, but I don't know.
About 2 o'clock in the morning.
Man, that's a little too late for me these days. But I loved playing there though, because
I bet you it's a good place to cut your teeth in.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, if you got the whole crowd that are pretty shit faced, if you mess up one, you're taking that hard, but is the crowd really noticing?
Yeah.
They're probably just,
it's a great place to cut your teeth. And that's kind of what, I was, coming from where I came from as a hard rock fan.
Mm-hmm.
These guys that I were playing with now, they were kind of more Beatles era people. They're like, for my generation, it was 80s hard rock that got us all fired up. For them, it was the Beatles, 64 on the Ed Sullivan Show. So I was coming from a different place, but I was playing the music that they were more in tune with. So I was learning all the classics like My Girl and all the Beatles songs. And this is like a step in time backwards to learn music that was way prior to what I was influenced by. So that helped round out my musical repertoire, learn things that I just didn't know. And that became a very big asset down the line. I don't probably talk about that enough, but currently with Taylor, who I play with, we do a lot of older songs. We'll do everything from Unchained Melody to, some classics. Like sometimes we'll do My Girl, or depends on the show, Brown Eyed Girl, those kind of things that we did back then. Okay. And then I have the facility to do the hard rock stuff that you're more familiar with, the Space Donkeys. Sure. So that's kind of where that started, with our classic rock, 70s, 80s rock. So yeah, it was a big deal for me to spend 10 years cutting my teeth. And it was a good time for me to do that because honestly, the market for what I was doing was not there.
Well, I figured Birmingham being so big, there would be lots of opportunity there.
There was. I was still playing, although at that time, none of the guys I grew up with were playing.
Gotcha.
So there was a time when I was doing something else I'll mention, but for the majority of that period, I'm playing with these two brothers, the Chandras, CJ and Anthony Chandra, and we're just a three-piece. And of course, that's a great thing to have when you're trying to play somewhere and you're trying to make enough money to make ends meet. There are always enough money to pay three people.
Gotcha.
You just get more people, it's harder to do that.
Right.
So we were always able to make that work for us. And so primarily those guys, but then there were other guys I played with in that area as well. And there was different times when I had different people I was playing with them.
Yeah.
But we were kind of like the core band. And then we end up out in Moody, Alabama, which is out towards Atlanta, and a house gig out there. And house gigs, for people who don't know, are just you set up your gear and you end up playing there for years, every weekend.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful amount of security that happens because you got a gig. You don't have to go chase them down.
No.
And the other part is that, you get this regular work.
Well, how far away was Moody from where you were?
At the time, I had moved out to Center Point, so I wasn't that far. Okay. I was about 30 minutes at that point. But that Moody gig was with another musician who's really still around and still big and still an amazing musician named Mike Weber, who was in a band called Razzmatazz in Birmingham. They were also, Revolver was the band he was in when I was younger. They were like a Beatles tribute, fantastic players. And when I heard about Mike, I heard about it from my girlfriend's mother, who was kind of in tune with the music scene, a little bit of a singer herself. And she told me how awesome this guy was. This guy, you're going to be blown away.
No.
And I was. He was and he still is. He's this library of knowledge, song-wise, that you could literally, he knows 500-600 songs, all the lyrics, can play the keyboards and the guitar.
Wow.
And he's just incredible.
At all of them.
It really helped me, because I was playing with a guy who had such talent and skill, and it all rubs off on me, as I'm working with him. And I bring in, what happens is those two brothers, they decide to leave that job because they didn't jive with his wife, who actually owned the bar. And so they end up leaving, and I'm getting paid so good at this point. I'm like, I can't leave, dude. This is all I'm doing.
Yeah.
So they asked me if I knew anybody, and I brought in the guys from Relics, which is the original band.
Gotcha.
I brought in the drummer and the keyboard player, and we kind of they brought in a bass player. And when we did this thing, it was called the Jam Babies. It was she pretty much named it. We just whatever, we got a gig, and these guys. When three of us already had a really good working relationship as far as being able to play together, and he brought in Mike brought in this bass player, Ralph Cantrell, and we had this automatic chemistry that really worked. And it was like the day we got together, it just boom, and we just went for 2 years straight there, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, every week for 2 years, and we got super tight because we were already right out of the gate so tight together just naturally. And it was a wonderful period, even though for me, I was really taking a step back from listening to music because it wasn't what I grew up with.
No.
But it was a great period to grow up as a player, to play lots of different material, and have this guy next to me who's such a freaking professional.
No.
And the brothers, too, were the two brothers that I played with. They had been playing a long time before. So they had all the... what I learned from them was like these house gigs, how cool they were. And I have one currently like that, at Hoppers, where I play acoustic every week. I've been there for 9 years.
Okay.
And it really helps me developed new talent. I've gotten a lot of singers by bringing in young people who haven't had any experience. I got involved in a karaoke judging thing one time where I ran across a couple really good singers.
Hey, you want to be in a band?
And I did. I would I would bring people in and that who had really no experience, but had the chops to pull it off. And then they would have to learn their repertoire, right? So they might not have anything coming in. And, I had one girl, we started out just from scratch, and she was a quick learner, and we ended up working together for 6 or 7 years, And that's been sort of like a thing with that house gig. It's been one of those things where I've been able to develop new talent,
sure,
to get, have a regular paying job weekly. And it's been a great thing. So that the house gigs from back in the day informed me, like, this is a way to have a little bit of security, to be able to work on your thing. It's really important for me,
So we talked about a couple of your influences already. I want to talk a little bit about,
sure,
I know one of your biggest influences.
Yeah.
And that's probably Van Halen, right, Eddie?
Sure, Eddie Van Halen, yeah.
Yeah, so, I'm a fan of your podcast, and I've watched, watched a lot of that stuff, and
Cool.
you got a lot of information I had no idea about. So I was just wondering what you got behind you. That kind of looks, is that something to do with him?
Yeah, I mean, this thing, the story of this guitar, it's kind of a transformational story of the guitar in general. When Eddie Van Halen came along, he couldn't find a guitar that really suited what he wanted. And so he started modifying guitars to a lot of torn up, trashed guitars that I'm sure his dad was really mad about because he was helping him buy some of the stuff. But what he was trying to go for was a certain thing where he could use the whammy bar, and he can also have the sound of a Les Paul and the whammy bar together. And they didn't exist together. They were two different guitars. And so what he did was he basically made a guitar that combined the best of what a Gibson Les Paul had, which was this humbucking pickup, basically, and what a Strat had, which was the tremolo bar. And that became this guitar, and it was the first guitar like that, and it was the one that transformed the industry. And people that don't know guitar don't understand that this type of guitar that you see everywhere now came from one guy.
Well, you're teaching me, because I didn't know that.
Yeah. And it's a very important part of, not only, obviously Van Halen as a band and their music was a huge thing. But one of the things that, like you said, you didn't know was that Eddie Van Halen transformed guitar with this particular. Now, I have it in this white and black. Most people are familiar with the red, white, and black, right? And the reason it was in red, white, and black was because people started copying him because he was so popular, and they all wanted striped guitars.
Right.
And so he had one company actually start manufacturing a particular striped guitar he had made, and they did it without his permission. And of course, that didn't go off well. So he decided to paint his black and white guitar, this one right here, red. And so what you see when you see the red, white, and black is you're seeing this guitar with the red on it.
Okay.
Same guitar.
Wow.
Okay. So that became the guitar it was in the Jump video and all the things. Yeah. This is really the same guitar. Just this is the early incarnation, the very first. And of course, he painted it and striped it. He said he didn't really have any idea how he did that, but there were a couple bands who had something similar to this.
Did he paint it, or he just put tape on it?
He painted it.
Okay.
Yeah, you start out with a black coat, and then you put painter's tape.
Gotcha.
They say he used more like gaff tape because it has some. You can see some of that in the image, and then he may have cut it. Of course, they're about the right sizes, so we don't know for sure if it was gaff. The thing is, did they have that painter's tape at the time? And people don't say they didn't. So anyway, that became this guitar, and that image. He basically put the tape on a black guitar and then painted white over it, pulled it. Then you get the stripe patterns.
Gotcha. At
first, it didn't have the skinny lines. These skinny lines are tape, by the way. And you said tape, right?
Yeah.
This is automotive tape here. So he did that too.
Yeah, pinstripes.
Right. Which is what one of my guests I just had on this week, in fact, said, that hot rod culture was a thing back then. And so those guys were in the cars, and they like to, like we had, Army surplus stores, right?
Sure, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where all this hardware and the striping and all that. He was like into such do-it-yourself kind of solutions that he would go down to this Army Navy surplus, and they would
See what I can find.
Yeah, you would see them in jumpsuits and stuff later in their tours.
Yeah.
And, it's this stuff. We don't know how much of it came from that particular one. And
Yeah, but it could have triggered an idea,
Well, that's what I'm saying. He's running around
Even if he didn't get it there. It was,
he's at the Army Navy surplus just looking around going, what can I do?
Yeah.
And he starts going, hey, this might be a little bit more, these eye bolts might really be a better strap. And this dog chain I got, that might be, and this is a replica made by my friend Lewis. That is an exact replica of the one he had at the time.
Mm.
And he made another one. He made another one out of a bomber, the straps that they strapped themselves in with.
Gotcha.
The bomber straps.
Yep.
He made another guitar strap out of one of those with one of those huge clamps that are on them.
Like the little pullover ones?
Yeah, that's it. Pullover ones,
yeah.
right. And the thing that Lewis found is he found new old stock of those 40-year-old clamps. And he made exact replicas with the real clamp.
Yeah.
So yeah, those things are really cool too because they're really, you're in military, so you know what kind of stuff that is.
Yeah, it was definitely not going to fall off.
Exactly, and that was kind of his thing. This guitar was really, he was trying to make it bulletproof where he could get it to stay in tune, which was really difficult at the time. They didn't have this thing called the Floyd Rose, which allowed it to you use as a whammy bar and still stay in tune. That became a thing. Again, another Eddie Van Halen thing. He was doing stuff with this bar eventually that no one had ever done. And then he came out with this invention where you can drop the lower string down a little bit for one of his songs that he used to do, Unchained, which is a song that I saw on the video. But he came up with all these innovations in the guitar that not a lot of people are aware of. No. And that's why this guitar is so important. It's a very transformative guitar in the business. Anywhere in the music business now, you'll see things that were Eddie Van Halen ideas. Yeah. Or germs of ideas, things that he was working on. Yeah. So he was like a Les Paul of his time, an inventor, as much as he was a guitar player and songwriter. Yeah. And people, I think that'll become more and more evident over time as his story's told.
Sure.
And so that's kind of what I'm doing on my podcast. Yeah. I'm going back to people that were there, that were at that CNS or CNH surplus, the surplus store where he went. Wow. These kids that were in the neighborhood. Sure. And they went. They all went to this place and they all knew about it.
I wonder what kind of a crowd that he drew when he go in there. You know what I mean? I mean, could you even walk around in that place? Well, or did they close it up for him?
This is all before he was famous.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So when he was building this, he wasn't famous. Mm. And this was in his backyard, his parents' house. And this is in 1977.
Okay.
When he made this guitar. And this is before they hit, and all the people in the town, they knew they were going to be famous. I mean, if you go through my podcast, everybody's like, they all say it. The guy was just on said, he went up to him after a show at a high school when he was in the early 70s and said, dude, you're as good as Richie Blackmore. You're as good as anybody I've ever heard on a record.
So when you were a kid, I mean, did you know that history, or did you?
No.
Or is that something that you did? I mean, we're talking about influences. I mean, what? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, was it influence just because of the way he was playing and who he was, or was it an influence because you knew his background and
I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about all that. That was a wonderful surprise to as a person who enjoys history.
When did you start digging into his history and realizing?
Well, I kind of knew his history as I was growing up because they would have the magazines, Guitar Player or whatever, and they would ask him about when you started playing and all that. And you get the basics. He was an immigrant from the Netherlands, and his band and the kind of the story of it. So there was some of that. Right. But Van Halen was like a lot of bands. They thought that being evasive about detail was a good thing. It gave them, like a mysterious quality.
Sure.
Like there's something you don't know about us.
Right.
And there was a lot of that, right?
Yep.
So Van Halen always had this thing where they would compare themselves to Led Zeppelin, where they would want to be like Led Zeppelin because they were, obviously influenced by them. And they would say stuff like, would Led Zeppelin do it? And that would be their rationale behind anything they would make a decision.
I wonder if that's what Greta Van Fleet thinks. Would Led Zeppelin do that?
I don't know. I don't know if that's what they think or not. But
isn't that funny that they don't even acknowledge? I mean,
it's funny.
I haven't seen them for a while. Maybe they do now, but
no, he's never really. I mean, he said it wasn't. So I don't know with Greta Van Fleet, but yeah, the Van Halen thing. You know, they wanted to be mysterious, and they and that's what happened is they left a lot of holes in their history. And how I got into the whole podcast, I was doing, like I said, interviewing my local friends on my podcast as a way to know more about those guys, you know, guys you've had.
Yeah, we're going to get there.
Yeah.
I don't want to jump into that
Sure. But basically, you know, that's kind of how I got into the history of Van Halen. Okay. I started, you know, doing, well, I'll say this. When he passed away is when it dawned on me that nobody was going to make the effort in their camp. Because there's, you know, if you know Van Halen, you know Van Halen has a lot of drama, right, and a lot of stuff between the members. And what happens is everybody has to agree on this stuff still. And like any band like that, Journey, for instance, and Steve Perry, even now when Steve Perry's been out of the band for decades, they still have to go to Steve Perry for every decision. For approval. Right.
Yeah, you can't release that video unless I say so.
Right.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, that'd be a mess.
And it's difficult. So even Wolfgang Van Halen, Eddie's son, he's caught up in it. And he didn't really ever want to be caught up in that. You know what I'm saying? Nope. So it left a vacuum is what happened. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, you know, wouldn't it be cool if I could find out some of these, because I would see these unknown stories online and I'd be like, man, that is a cool story. Yeah. And I had to just give this one shout out to the guy who actually helped me get going with that, and his name is Mike Simmons, and really this is the way
the name sounds familiar.
He works up at Blackbird Studios in Nashville. That's the studio that Martina McBride and her husband John run.
Gotcha.
And Mike works for them as their rental equipment manager, and they have a huge thing there with that, but one of the biggest in the world. Mike and I met through a mutual friend, and Mike had this vlog about his experience of seeing Van Halen in 1978 in Nashville, Tennessee. Walked into the show, had no idea what he was going to see, didn't know a thing hardly about
them. 78?
78. Yeah. Barely knew anything about this band, heard maybe one track on the radio, and wasn't that impressed with what he heard, was just running with the devil. Because he was in Blackmore and a lot of really technical stuff. But he ends up down front. This is Black Sabbath Van Halen in Nashville in 78. And he writes this blog on the show. And it's it's such a powerful, I'm kind of get chills because it was such a powerful way that he told the story. It just hit me like, dude, you have to tell this story on a podcast with me. And that's what started it all. Wow. We told the story. Mm. And that story's also famous because not David Lee Roth, but Ozzy Osbourne, obviously with Black Sabbath at that point, he was partying with David Lee Roth for too many days prior. Doing stuff that you can't, makes you not sleep, right? And so he's a little bit older than Roth, right? Yeah. So he got so tired that they're going hotel to hotel. He ends up getting a key, going to a room, and thinking it's this one room, but it's another. The door was open. The maid was in there. So he thinks this is his room. He goes in it. It's not his room. It's the wrong room. Now nobody knows where Ozzy is because he falls asleep on that bed. Yeah. And then he misses the show in Nashville. No. And a slight riot breaks out when Black Sabbath doesn't get on stage. Mm. But because they were so late, they asked Van Halen to keep playing. Eventually, they knew it was going to be trouble, and they hit the back door before it was trouble. And so that was a famous story in the Van Halen storybook. Then they had to go back out on the road, come back to Nashville another week later, and play another show. Oh, wow. So my buddy got free tickets to not only the show that he was given tickets to by his boss, but to the second show because Ozzy. Gotcha. Yeah. Mm. So it's a wonderful story that he told and really got me started on the path of telling these stories, like a Van Halen stories. That's where it came from. Obviously, it's just like these wonderful stories about your inspiration. Obviously, this has inspired his entire life. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Let's take a real quick break.
Sure.
I'm going to get something to drink, and we'll be right back. Go ahead. Whatever.
Subscribe, please, to Pickle Cato.
Yeah, it was good to, good to talk about some of the early influences too, because I don't talk about those enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of those people that were involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, aside from the influence, I think by the way, we're back.
Yep, we're back.
What I know about you is the numerous bands that you've been in, created, helped with.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about some of those, but one I want to talk about and have a specific question about is Crush.
Yeah.
So Crush, I think you had those guys, for 10 years?
Mm-hmm. For a decade, yeah.
And we can talk more about Crush, but the specific question I have is, how do you keep a band together for that long?
It's hard.
With those different, I'm not just poking fingers at Crush, but any band, obviously you have different personalities.
Sure.
And so how do you keep that together?
Yeah, I mean, Crush was it was one of those things, man, where it started pretty organically. I had me and this buddy of mine, when I came to Huntsville, we were talking about me doing the American Legion and all that. I came to Huntsville, I didn't know anybody. And I was working in a corporate job that took a lot of my time. I was selling medical equipment across the 3-state region. And where I live here in this area was kind of central to my territory. And so I was pretty busy. And I wasn't playing except for in Birmingham with these guys. I was still driving to Birmingham.
Okay, wow.
I would do my week, and then I would drive to Birmingham, and I would stay with the drummer overnight over the weekends. And that's how I would continue working, playing. So there was this period of time where I was living up here but working down there. And then eventually that got to be too much, man. I literally had flown down to, I think, Texas or Florida, and done a training session on some equipment and flown back
to Birmingham,
to Nashville. Okay. I was living here, right?
Yeah.
So I had flown to Florida, done a training session, got on a plane, flew back to Nashville, drove back here, got my stuff, drove to Birmingham, and played a show the same night.
Wow.
And it
was that one of the 12 to 5 things, or was that just...
No, that was a 9 to 2, but yeah, it was to the point where when I was looking at the money and I was thinking, man, is it, and that's kind of what I made the separation from that scene. Yeah. So when I started here, I had met my gym instructor who her husband was a player. He played bass and sang. And so we just got together, and next thing you know, I had a duo acoustic, which is the first time I'd done that really seriously. And he and I started a 3-piece of what was Crush. We had met Rob Nelson, who was a drummer, who's still around. And me and him had sort of a chemistry already together. It just worked. Just one of those things. All the harmonies worked and all that. And so we got Rob in the band, and we started the 3-piece band, which was Crush in the very beginning. The name comes from, and I'll say this, Rob had a Great Dane.
Okay.
His name was Crush. And when we first practiced over there at Rob's place, we were in a bedroom, and out of nowhere comes a Great Dane. And I didn't know there was a Great Dane. And he runs in, how Great Danes are. They're huge, right? He runs in and he jumps up on the bed next to us. So now the dog's face is actually above me, right? So anyway, it just became one of those things where we were searching for a name, and we just all went with that, and that was fine. So, and that evolved. We had Brian, eventually he left, and then who was my first singer, and Rob stayed with me, and another guy came in, Rush, who was very popular back in the day. And then Spike was the next singer, and then we had Seth, and we had a number of players. Mainly the bass player and I were the ones that lasted the 10 years. And but yeah, everybody's path kind of, sometimes they get tired of whatever they're doing, Yeah. and they don't want to continue with that. So it's a hard thing because you're building yourself. You're building your repertoire, you're building your band, you're building your reputation. You're getting people to come see you, and then somebody decides to leave, and when they do, it's always
it's devastating.
Yeah,
probably,
it's like, think about any job you have and a partner you've had in it. And if you're invested in them and then they leave, or you have a falling out or whatever, it's devastating. I just had to, I had that happen so many times over the years. It became like a normal thing, and it was so brutally.
So you're probably just waiting for the hammer to drop with all the bands.
Always.
Yeah.
You're always waiting for what's going to happen. And luckily, I've been real lucky for the last number of years. But also, you said all the bands, right? And that's because, it became a thing where I couldn't rely on one band. That was one part of it. But
sure.
The other part was that when I was in Crush, Black Eyed Susan, we were talking a little bit earlier about Black Label. And I forgot about this connection, but Black Eyed Susan's guitar player, Craig Smoot, was Black Label's guitar player at the time. And I think Craig was just more invested in Black Label. He just liked the music probably better, I think. And there are some internal things going on within Black Eyed Susan. And so they asked me to fill in for some shows because Craig wasn't wanting to do these shows. And they were Sammy T's. They were big shows and they were good paying shows. And I was like, hell yeah, I'll do it. And I wasn't playing enough at the time to be so busy I couldn't do it. So I did it as a fill-in at first. And I did it for about a year. And eventually they were kind of like, they wanted somebody committed to them. So I joined Black Eyed Susan, which was already this big band in Huntsville.
Sure.
And Crush was doing pretty well too at the same time. We were growing quickly. And so I had these two good bands going. And my wife and I had left the medical field, and I had a side business doing wedding videography. And that's kind of where some of the video comes from, some of that. And so I was making sort of a side living doing that. Even when I was working at my medical sales job, I was doing that. So kind of as I transitioned out of that job, I still had a job.
Yeah.
And I had two bands. Yeah. And this is when I was a lot younger, so it was easier. But so I started doing the videography and the bands, and then my wife was helping. And it got to a point where the band's gigs got so busy on weekends that she would end up having to do the receptions at every wedding, right? Yeah. She would be stuck with the
cussing at you.
Yeah, she's like, at some point you got to, I got to get, I don't know, So she ended up, about that time, she lost her job. And so she ended up full-time on that, doing that. So it saved us a little bit there, having our side gig. And eventually she went back to work at the same place. And so I'm so busy now with my band stuff that I make the transition, because at the time Space Donekys comes around. Mm-hmm. And this is a weird thing that happened. Basically, it was a throw together that we did on a Wednesday night.
How'd you meet Donnie?
Donnie Pilot.
Yeah.
Well, Donnie and I met when he was before Black Eyed Susan. That's how I ended up in Black Eyed Susan. I met Donnie when he was running lights one night. And he was the one who contacted me because I didn't know anybody in the band. And this is a funny story, and I'll tell it about Black Eyed Susan. Is when I came to town, they were the thing, right? They were the most popular band in town. And of course, my first inkling was like, I have to compete with these guys. People, I saw this online earlier on one of these sites. They're like, music's not a competition. I'm like, yeah, well, okay, right. Whenever you're competing even whenever you want to work. Oh, yeah. Somebody else is not going to work, or you're going to work, or, and that's just how it is. So you're competitive. I'm in town with Black Eyed Susan. I want to play where they're playing.
Yep.
That means they may not have a gig that night. I might have that gig, right?
Sure.
So I was very competitive with them, and I thought, man, I gotta make these guys. I gotta do something better than these guys. And I used to have this really kind of adversarial thing in my mind with it, not so much with them personally. Although I did have one interaction with Smooth that it wasn't really smooth, and thought it was kind of,
no, Craig didn't get upset.
Kind of hit me funny, because we knew we had we had a mutual friend, and I don't know what happened that night, but I'm friends with Craig, at this point, of course. But at the time when it happened, I thought it was kind of like, that was kind of weird. What did I do? Yeah. Wrong. And I just, who knows, what you catch people at certain points, but anyway, that really made me really want to go after these guys. and get their gigs.
Well, that's the business entrepreneur that you get.
I guess so.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't like mean spirited. It was just like, you know, I'm going to do something in this town. You know, and he may not have thought I was anybody or was going to do anything, but I had a previous career in Birmingham working for years.
They probably didn't even know about.
They didn't know me. No, they didn't know that. And I was doing pretty well with Crush, so I'm sure that was getting a little bit, you know, like, who are these guys? And so anyway, the call comes from Donnie to do the fill-ins, right? Yeah. And of course, I have this sort of adversarial thought about this band, right? I don't really like these guys that much, you know. I like Donnie, but these other guys, I don't know about these guys. So anyway, and they of course know this story. And so I get the call. I tell my wife, I go, guess who called me? And she was like, who? I was like, Black Eyed Susan called me. And she's like, what? It's like, yeah, they want me to start filling in for them. And she goes, you going to do it? I was like, can't beat them, join them.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So what did Craig have to say about that?
Well, Craig was, like I said, he was kind of like,
so
he was in and out.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any interaction with Craig at that point. That was purely their deal.
Sure.
And, you know, I can't say that at the time I thought it was kind of weird that I had this weird interaction with Craig. And then the next thing you know, I'm playing in his spot. It's kind of a weird situation, but whatever, you know, I went with it. And what's funny is I meet Scott, you know, their singer and my good friend, Scott O'Hanian, and another guy you probably should talk to at some point because he's really a good guy. And we hit it off like best friends. And we've been best friends kind of like since. Yeah. We still have our moments, you know, but we've been like best friends.
All friends get their moments.
Yeah, you're right. So we still talk all the time. And even though we're not in the same bands anymore or anything. And so I really hit it off with the band, just in general. Yeah. And so it started a 9-10 year relationship with them, you know, in that situation. So it's the synergy of Crush. You know, Black Eyed Susan stayed pretty stable member-wise with me. And once I was in, it was Donnie, me, and Scott and Jay. So we were on a 10-year run there. I had Crush going. Of course, this was the one where everybody was in and out so hard.
So that's going simultaneously.
Oh yeah,
gotcha.
All this is going on. Black Eyed Susan playing, scheduling around that with Crush, 2 bands. Then I'm working at the station on a regular basis in Madison, where I kind of first got my taste of Black Eyed Susan and wanted to play there. Yeah. I was like, man, I want to play here. Good place. And so I ended up doing really well with her, with the owner. Well, the owners before, Danny Cunningham, who I still am great friends with, and his sister, Sandy. And they kind of take me in, and we're doing really good business together, and I'm busy with my other band there and Eyed Susan, so this is kind of it's got some synergy between it. And then they sell it to another lady, and she likes me and says, hey, I need a Wednesday night band. And I'm like, well, I got enough friends. I can put something together. And that's when I get Jay, which is from Black Eyed Susan, the keyboard player, me and Tim, who I play with now, Tim O'Brien. And at that point, we kind of went with Jason Miller at first.
Jay Richter?
Jay Richter, yeah. Jay Richter, me, Tim O'Brien, and Jason Miller, who was the original Space Donkeys drummer. And that was my first time I played with Jay Miller on a regular basis. I think he filled it for me before. But anyway, that started a kind of like 1 year period where we were playing on Wednesday nights.
Gotcha.
But this is during the time when the economy started to bottom out, 2007, 2008. And I noticed immediately, like Wednesday nights used to be a big thing in town. But all of a sudden, once this economy thing happened, everything started to really dry up during the week. And the bars just couldn't support a band at that point, you know. So that kind of played out eventually, a couple of years, I think. And in the second half of that, well, actually, when that played out, I forget how I met David Terry, but I think I heard something online he did. And Jay was having trouble with his voice, so Jay kind of bowed out. And it wasn't a full-on band at the time. This was, like I said, a throw together Wednesday night.
Sure.
It was sort of like not an exclusive band. 2010 with this. And so David comes in. And David and us, that combination with David and Jason Miller on drums, Tim and me, we had a thing. It was one, like I said earlier, when I had the other band, and it clicked.
Yeah.
It was the same thing.
Yeah.
We had that instantaneous. I tell you what, we made this thing. It was funny. We used to say, we shouldn't have to practice. And we only got together with David Terry one time. And then we went out and started playing. Because we had so many years under our belts as players and so many common songs.
Yeah.
We walked into the practice room, we had a list, and we just
did it.
and it was done.
Yeah.
And it was just that easy. I mean, it was ridiculous. And so we got off to this great start. We never practiced ever.
Yeah.
And if we learned a new song, we'd learn it on our own.
Mission accomplished.
We'd learn it on our own and show up at a show, and we would stick it where we could, so it wasn't, critical. And that's how we did it for 6 years with David. And that kind of played out with David. And David got married, and kind of, again, like I said, sometimes people just want to go their separate ways. And so we had Jeff Nixon, who was in another band, this is a really ironic fact about this. And this caused some heartache. And this wasn't intentional by my point, but they had another band in town that David Terry used to be part of called Damn Skippy.
Mm-hmm.
And when David decided to leave Damn Skippy to come play with Space Donkeys full time, of course, that probably didn't go over well with his guys.
Probably not.
Right. And of course, I'm enemy number one now because I'm probably the one who caused it, right? I didn't cause anything. It was up to David, whether he wanted to do that or not. And so he could have done both because we were fine with that because I was doing plenty of stuff too. And he was doing that before. So David leaves the Space Donkeys, and Jeff Nixon is the replacement for David in the Space Donkeys. Not Space Donkey. He's the replacement in Damn Skippy. So David's in Damn Skippy. He leaves it to come to Space Donkeys. Now Jeff Nixon is the new guy in Damn Skippy.
Mm-hmm.
Then 6 years later, David leaves, and Jeff Nixon's not working much at all. I'm watching
what's going on.
Watching their feed.
Yeah.
There's nothing going on over there.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's I don't know how committed he is to it. So I asked him, you gigging? What do you want to do? I mean, are you good? Are you staying? You want to stay with that, or would you like to come sing with us? Anyway, I guess he came and auditioned or whatever, and we were thinking about Crush because Crush was having a problem at that point. And Jeff was not a fit for Crush. We were a dance band.
Yeah.
We were like Brick House.
Sure.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Jeff's a rocker. That's his thing, right? And when we were kind of like at the end of the Space Donkeys, and that was sitting, and there was nothing. David left, and it was done.
Yeah.
Actually done for a year, I think. And then I saw that he wasn't working, and I was in this Crush situation where I needed somebody. And I was like, this is not going to work for Crush because it's just not what people know.
Yeah.
And so the Space Donkeys were the perfect thing. And since it was 3 members of the Space Donkeys, we added him. And of course, he leaves Damn Skippy now, okay? So this is the second singer
now you're in real trouble.
I guess I poached, and I didn't poach him. He made that decision on his own.
Sure.
People want to do things. It's not, I'm offering him a job, so there's that happens. And I know it's possible it happens to me, people will come along and see somebody I'm playing with and go, this person's pretty good. Maybe they want to come play with me instead of him. And that happens, and it's happened to me in the last few years. But, it's just the way it is. When they decide to make that decision about their career path, there's really nothing you can do about it. If it's a personal thing that they want to, a family thing or another path they want to take,
Well, I would think if, you have a good relationship, and of course, band members are going to be tight. Yeah, it sucks and you hate it. But if you're with that person, you should almost be happy for them that they're at least have the balls and say, "Hey guys,
Yeah.
I'm out." Yeah, you're like, that's bullshit, whatever. But in the long run, if you're friends with him, you're like, yeah, you know what, he's doing what's best for him. So
yeah,
there's always somebody else.
Yeah, there's the thing about that is it's unfortunately with bands, everybody's a little bit. Nobody wants to ever hurt anybody's feelings.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So everybody's
because everybody knows everybody around here.
Well, there's that too. But there's also the thing like when you try to exit, it's not always you kind of don't want to exit, but you kind of do.
Yeah.
You're on the fence. And I'm a big fan of Steve Vai, who was with David Lee Roth in the early days, and it's this virtuoso guitar player, but he's also kind of a teacher in a way. And he talks about these kind of things. And he says, like, if somebody is in your band that doesn't want to be there, they're not helping you, and they're not helping themselves, and they're not helping the audience.
Sure.
So let them do their thing. As I think back now about everybody that I had come through, there's been some hard moments, but man, we did some fun stuff together. And I'm still doing that. That's what I'm chasing every week when I go to work, is an amazing night with a partner. Like I had one yesterday. We had an amazing show last night. And you just never know when they're going to have them. But that's what you do when you start out, you're thinking you're going to be Van Halen or whatever. What you don't realize is what ends up being the real win is that moment when the audience connects with you and you connect with them and you feel like, man, that was a job well done. I did what I did and they loved me. They love what we do.
We all experienced it together.
And we all had a good time tonight. You know what I mean? Yep. And then I go down in the audience like I did last night and I give out my guitar picks. People just kind of make fun of that. But it's a way for me to connect with people.
Sure.
And when I sit down and I'll spend a few minutes with people from all over the world in that particular venue because it's a hotel. And I get moments to learn about them, their life and where they're from. And that's part of what we do.
Yeah.
And if you go, a lot of musicians are shy and they'll go hide on breaks. But when I was younger at that place in Moody, the lady that ran that place, she almost made it like a thing. She said, "You got to go mingle."
Yeah.
Mingle. I'm like, mingle? I'll take that. But, for as when I was young, that just didn't seem that important. But it is important.
It's very important.
So one of the things, like with newer singers or people, is like to get them to go ahead and engage with some people in the crowd, maybe even before they sing.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is you're giving yourself, you're opening yourself up to them as a person. And they connect with that, right? And then they go on stage and they connect with you more.
Yep.
And so your night goes better.
Yeah.
Because all you did was just make a little personal connection with somebody. That's such a big thing.
So how many bands are you in right now?
Right now, there's 3 regular bands.
Mm-hmm.
347 with Taylor.
Okay.
Space Donekys is still around, which is amazing.
Yeah.
It's now the longest running band of all. That's a 2010 to 2024, 14 years.
Yeah.
2 singers, 14 years. And then 347's been around 7 years. Plan B was the band I had with Kelly. That's been with singers and without singers, but that's actually a 8-year-old band. Mm-hmm. We still have our original singer, Angela Hacker from the Shoals, coming in sometimes and filling in, and still doing shows with it less frequently. Fireproof is a band with Dana. Dana's fairly new as far as singing in the band, but again, this was a person that I met 5 years ago and that I've been working with, trying to get her to the point where she could be in the front of a band.
How do you have so much time to be able to work that?
That's all I do. It's my full-time living.
Well, I get it, but to get everybody's schedules together to be able to do anything with one band, let alone
that's the thing, man. Like a lot of people ask me that question, like, how do you pull that off? And it's man, I was the most non-calendar guy probably before I had to take over the idea of running my own business, Well,
before, what's odd about that is I've contacted you a couple different times to play at different things, and I'm talking months out, and you're like, man, I can't.
Yeah. I book a year in advance.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You have that much going on and still keep it all scheduled. I think it's pretty amazing to me that you can keep all that stuff going on at one time.
Yeah, me too. I mean, something, dude, like when I start out the beginning of the year or before the beginning of the year in October, actually every year, I start looking at 175 dates that I've got to hit, because if I'm going to be a professional musician, I've got to bring in my part of the income at home.
Yeah.
And my wife's job is pretty good, but we'd make it work together. And it's not like I can slough off and not work, and no more than I could at any other job. And this is a difference between somebody who's part-time in it and full-time in it. It gets me up.
Yeah.
It's the thing that I got to do. It's good because it's freedom to, like, I can do it at any time. Today, all I did was sit in my bed with my phone and, like, try to book things that I haven't gotten or more stuff.
Yeah.
Build up the big thing is, like, anything that you want to do on a regular basis, you have to build like such a reserve of it. Like, you got to almost have too much. Like, I remember some guy said on an interview, you can't ever turn a gig down. Never. If you want to work, that's not allowed. You can't.
You turned me down a couple times.
I might have been working though. I was working.
I'm just giving you shit.
I was working, but yeah, I mean, if I wasn't working, I'd been there in a heartbeat. Yeah. But that's the thing is, like, and almost always try to, like, overfill my schedule.
Yeah.
Because what happens is,
somebody's going to bail out. I mean, if you're booking a year out, I mean, who's going to know if they're really going to be up for it, a year from that time? So,
I'd say, the other thing is, like, one of the things that as I grew up, I got, like I told you, man, to go up people. Dude, I was a really shy kid. And when I'm a guitar player coming up, right, I'm this kid in his room who doesn't even want to come out when my mom has people over. I'm like, I go to my room.
Yeah.
Because it's uncomfortable for me. And I was painfully shy. So the guitar was a refuge, once I found Eddie Van Halen. I was like, I had something, that was mine.
Well, he seemed shy.
He was.
Yeah.
Very, very much. And so much of his substance problems came from this anxiety that he had. You'll see it if you watch some videos occasionally. You'll catch one where you can tell he's not in the right mindset, and he's not doing so well. And it's all this shyness and this thing. But again, now as a kid, I never knew that Eddie Van Halen was the same dude that I was. Mm-hmm. Growing up in my room, hiding from the world, then became this entertainer. I mean, how do you do that? Mm-hmm. So as I hit my 20s, I realized, like, if you want to do this career, you got to be comfortable in front of people.
Sure.
I mean, you're going to be playing in front of people, bro. Yeah. Right? You got to do this. So I kind of forced myself through it. And eventually I got into that job I was telling you about in the medical field, which I was a salesperson. I was in sales at the music store.
Well, that'll help you be a people person.
You start to develop your skills. You start to learn how to be around people and talk to people. And I think probably when I think back about the most important things that I've been able to bring to the situation I'm in is that I got comfortable with that. Like, I learned how to build relationships with people.
Yeah.
When I was in the medical sales business, it was a huge quotas, very high pressure. And you would go in to a hospital to sell something. You have 25 decision makers about one sale.
Right.
25, and you didn't even know who they were. So when I came back to the music business as a full-time thing, I'm thinking I got one or two decision makers. Piece of cake. Yeah. Right after 15 years of that.
Yeah.
And the pressure that went along with that. So maybe what you're asking me about is how I do it. It's probably because I've been in that other place that is so brutal to me that I really love this part. I enjoyed talking to people and being involved in that, but I had no, like, real control over my outcome so much as I do with music.
So since you have this stuff booked out so far in advance and you know what you're going to be doing the next 3 or 4 months.
Sure.
So you probably really don't advertise where you're going at all? I mean, is there a place that somebody can go?
I do advertise. I advertise on my personal page on Facebook every week.
Okay.
What's
that page?
Just my normal Facebook.
I mean, so people that's listening know where to go.
Well, you can either go to our band pages, which, 347 is the one band page. Okay. Space Donkeys band page. Retro Rock Revival, which is our 80s tribute band that we do, the two combination of the two 347 and Space Donkeys members, and that travels a bit. But then we've got Fireproof. So 347, Space Donkeys, Fireproof, Retro Rock Revival, any of those band pages.
Show the schedule.
Yeah. In fact, I do a schedule when I get it kind of like together. I make a master schedule and pin it.
Gotcha.
So if you want to find our schedule, go to the Facebook page for it and just look for that pinned schedule. Okay. It's right there.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I do that every year.
So next thing I want to ask you about, and I apologize,
Sure.
I tried to research as much as I could.
Sure.
But one of the last things that I saw was that girl Chastity sing on your podcast.
Yeah.
Is she part of any of these bands?
No, she is.
She has got an incredible voice.
Yeah.
And if you haven't, it's going to be hard for me to tell you exactly where it's at, but we'll get to where your podcast is and kind of be able to find it. But what an amazing voice. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? This is a funny story too, which really comes down to relationships. Chastity is Taylor's cousin.
Okay.
And Taylor, when Kelly exited the situation, I was left with this void in my schedule because I had her booked, for the year. So I had to figure out who to put in there. And I started putting Taylor in, and it got to be too much for Taylor. It was just too many gigs. I mean, your voice can only take so much. And her mom suggested Chastity, who was a cousin. And she came in, we're at Hoppers, where I always play every week. And again, this is, I have to say thanks to Peter Doyle, who has hired me there for the last 9 years. He's given me a place and a regular gig that I can bring in somebody like Chastity, who's newish, has some experience, able to get up there and sing. But what I would do is I would have Chastity sing half a night or a set and work her up to the point where she could be full-time. Yeah. And over the last 2 years, Chastity's come up to speed, and she's my full-time Wednesday night person with Taylor. They alternate.
Okay.
Chastity has a pretty busy job during the day, and so that's really all she wants to do a little bit. I mean, maybe she might do something later in limited fashion. We've talked about it.
Well, don't let her break your heart.
No, I hope not. I mean, I love Chastity, and she does really good. And last night she was with me, and we did excellent. And she's got a unique voice. And
Stevie Nicks. I mean, that's the song that I heard.
Dreams.
Yep.
Yeah. She we did that at my house. We did this is another thing I always did with singers, and you can find a lot of them online. Is I would do these what I call evaluation videos, where I would have somebody over who I was considering for work, sort of an audition, where I would record them, videotape them, and then I would have it for not only for promotional, like this is the person,
sure,
but I have a way to kind of look at it for myself, and I have some time with them personally, and I did that with almost every singer, and there's lots of singers that are on there that you'd never seen play with me live. Because they either, they decided not to go forward with it or something like that, or they got busy, got married, had a child or something, as far as the females go.
Okay.
Yeah, I just haven't, it's weird because when I was younger, I never had female singers. It was all guys. But I've found all these great girls, and I just have been having so much luck with that. And I love working with them. They're easy to work with. And Chastity's wonderful, and Taylor has been with me for, Taylor was 21 when I met her. She was a baby. Now she's 28. She's kind of a grown woman now, and got married, and I was at her wedding, and and part of that, and it's wonderful, had to have, and I became so close to her mom and dad that they're like family.
Yeah.
I see her mom and dad as much as my own.
Sure.
I see her as much as my wife.
Yeah.
So it's like I said, now it's a double-edged sword if things get sideways, because then you become the enemy, or you become
I wouldn't consider
the enemy, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
it becomes a difficult situation.
Yeah, I get it,
and it's painful for all involved, because you become so tight with each other, you become family almost.
Yeah.
And it's weird, like with family, like I could fight with family and we'd always get over it. But with band stuff, because with family, you're always stuck with each other no matter what, right? And you have to get over it.
You have to come to Christmas.
right. And you got to get over it. But with band stuff, you could never, basically sometimes that's the end of it.
Yeah, you can put that space in between you and
you may never see each other again.
Yeah.
And it's literally like having a girlfriend in high school and just being over.
Yeah.
And it's, I would say that's probably the hardest thing about what I do. And the amount of work that I have to do is it puts me in a situation where I'm very serious about what I do.
Sure, yeah.
And when I bring someone in, I try to make them understand that this is my living and I have to be very careful with it. I have to be good with business and I have to be, everything that you do is a reflection on me.
Right.
So if you go out and play on your own, which is one of the reasons why I'm kind of like not really that enthused with that, is if you're doing business without me and something goes wrong, I'm getting the call from the bar owner.
Yeah.
I'm getting the call. Why am I getting the call? I can't, when you're that close, it's really hard to separate, and bar owners won't. They go, "What's your girl doing?"
Yeah. Don't bring her back here.
It's happened.
Yeah.
It's happened. And of course, I've taken the lump for that when it's happened, because these are my my players, these are my singers, these are my partners. And so if we have to take a lump to have a lesson, then that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
But it's happened, and you were talking about all this stuff I do. There's a lot of moving parts, not just in the basics, booking it, maintaining the relationship, getting paid, administrating that pay, because now nobody does cash. They do checks.
Yeah.
And so everything has to go through me because they just want to write one check.
Yeah.
Then we have to go through the administration of it. Now it's like I'm running a business where I'm actually cutting pay to people.
Yeah.
Instead of them giving them pay, I'm doing it. So that's one more layer of stuff I have to do, or my wife has to do, and which she does. So all that, and then I'm not taking any percentages either. I'm not treating them like I'm a booking agent.
You're not taking your 20% off the top.
You normally do for that kind of thing. Yeah. I do take some money off the top for when I use my PA and I use my gas, my trailer, all these expenses that I take, so that I don't end up making less money than my band members do.
That's only fair.
And I'm doing I'm not taking the 20% either. So I've always felt like I've been pretty fair about that part of it, because I do feel like everybody kicks in and does their thing, and we all help each other out, load ins and load outs, and it's an important part of bonding too when you're working together. And so I think that trying to keep that atmosphere of teamwork together, because people will tend to want to walk off and they get caught up with their spouses or their friends or whatever, and you lose that bond of working together and being a team. And so whenever I see that going awry, I'm like, you need to be involved with us, because it's not just about doing equal amount of work. It's about the connection.
Yeah, talking about whatever we did, before and after.
What we did, how we can do what we're going to do next week, planning for the future, what everybody would like to see happen. Yeah. We're always collaborating on the future. That's another thing, like what we were doing, what's our plan? So I don't know if any band people be watching this, but basically, I do a business plan. At the beginning of the year, I go, okay, here's all my clubs. Here's what I want to do with each band. And now I got to go do it.
No.
And then I go for 3 to 4 or 5 months, trying to get people to commit to those dates.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how it works. It's tough. And when having the spousal complexity on the outside sometimes gets, it's like, I'm trying to just hold this together.
Right.
Hey,
you want to take this over? Let's see how this goes.
Well, it's like you get somebody like my bass player came to me this year, and he's got a not new girlfriend, but he wanted to take some time off, and I'm like, you're my only bass player, right? And it's really hard for me to work without you. I depend on you.
No.
And if you are off too much, I got to get somebody else. And I don't want to do that. That sucks for me. But if I had to do it, that's what I have to do because I don't have a choice.
No.
But, I always was it. I told you a minute ago, somebody said, you can't turn down work or you will end up not working.
Right, right.
Because it's a chain reaction, right? And it's sort of the same thing with band members. It's like you really can't pick and choose if you really want to work.
Yeah.
And so when somebody comes in, I've had that happen a few times. People come in and they think they can just kind of pick and choose. What happens is I'm dealing with 9 schedules. And when you're just going, I don't really feel like it this week.
Not only that, and even though you're dealing with what you're dealing with, but you're also dealing with the band members, the other band members that guy's affecting.
Sure.
It's just not just affecting you, it's affecting
Exactly.
the whole band.
The whole band.
Yeah.
So, we we'll have people come in sometimes and they'll want to just pick and choose. And you're talking about 3 other people's incomes and mine.
Right.
Or 2 other people's incomes and mine that you're in and out on. And when I've committed it to an owner, this is where it gets bad.
Yeah.
Once I've committed something to an owner, see, the thing is I wouldn't say a lot of people, but people have taken for granted that, oh, well, Chastity or Taylor or somebody else could do it. Well,
it's a total different set list.
What if they wanted, that, and what if they had plans?
Right, right.
They're not on call either. It has worked out for me when I've had somebody get sick. We had COVID, that and the whole that.
Man.
We had those situations where we had to shift some things. And we can do that, luckily. But any other band, you'd never be able to do that.
No.
And your gigs depend on you showing up, right? Like
that's a source of their income too. They're paying you, but obviously they're paying you for a reason to bring in a crowd. And if you're not showing up, then
you're gone.
That's a whammy on them. They're going to be like, well, I ain't going to call that guy again.
Exactly.
Screw me. This is a Saturday night, man.
Right. See, I'd say this too, Bill. 2 secrets. One secret is always show up.
Yeah.
That was probably, they say 90% of the gig is showing up.
No.
And it's probably more like 100% of the gigs.
Not just the gigs, but with everything to do with it, whether it's practice or
anything. Show up on time too.
Yeah.
That's another thing, you got to really be accurate with your, because they'll run into so many people who aren't like this in the music business. If you just do that, those people, no matter how talented they are, no matter how great they are, and I could name 20 people in town.
I can name a couple too.
Who can't just get out of their own way.
And they're phenomenal.
I love them. As people, I love them. As players, I think they're wonderful.
Yep.
But I would say that, the most of the time, whenever something bad happens, it's because they weren't able to execute on the number one, which is showing up.
Yep.
That is a huge thing. And everybody in my organization, they have to. Like you said, the bar owners and everybody that is coming to see you, you've committed to them.
And I'm sure having the experience that you have, at the beginning of anything now, that's fully disclosed at the very beginning. There ain't no, 6 months into it. Hey, we need to have a talk. I'm sure that's up front.
You know how it is.
Yeah.
I've gotten to the point with it where I try to be so upfront with people because I just don't want to get down the road with them and fall in love with them personally because I get emotionally attached to the people.
Yeah.
Like if I was hanging out with you all the time.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden...
Well, you get sick of me real quick.
You know what I'm saying? If I hanging out with you all the time, we'd be buddies, and we'd be like, and then you go, sorry, bro, I want to go do this. And I'm like, dude, really? After freaking 6 months of us hanging out?
I'm going to go hang out with Mike.
6 years? Yeah, right? Mike's cool, though. That's fine. But yeah, man. Yeah, it's a thing, man. It's a real... Bands are... I'm a band guy. Yeah. I say this a lot. I do acoustic, but I'm a band guy first because I enjoy the camaraderie of a band.
Sure.
I do enjoy my duos because I do have that same kind of camaraderie with the people I work with acoustically. But yeah, band, when I play electric guitar, man, that's my thing.
Yeah.
So people are always like, the girls would always say, "You should see him play electric guitar." And I'm like, well, it's because I'm playing for the song when I'm playing acoustic. I'm not trying to rip on acoustic. Yeah. But when I get to use my electric, it's a whole different world.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I enjoy about it. I improvise a little bit and I have fun. But yeah, I love bands, man. I love doing it, and I wouldn't be doing it if I wouldn't be doing all that.
Well, yeah. I mean, you got to love what you're doing to be putting up with all that stuff.
You know, you've probably heard that. I mean, everybody's heard that phrase. You'll never work a day in your life if you love what you're doing, or whatever. That, you know, there's the other part of that I heard, which is, and I forget where it comes from, kind of different places, but basically, you'll never work as hard at something if it's something you love.
No.
And that is the secret to being a success. Is being able to work so hard that you never, you know, you're able to put that much energy into it. That's why you say, like, how do you do it? Dude, it's because if I didn't love that, there would be no way I could even get around to doing it. I just wouldn't.
So on top of all of that we've just talked about, all the stuff that you're doing with the bands, the scheduling, and all that encompasses that with numerous bands. Sure. Somehow you found the time to start a podcast called Final Resonance TV. Yeah. Now, we talked a little bit at the beginning, we're kind of like in the middle of how that started. Sure. Was that just going to be like a temporary thing? You're just going to do that little portion of the Van Halen? Or
yeah, I'll tell the story because it's got an interesting story. It started out in the Shoals. I was going up there, Noah Webster, you know Noah? Mm-mm. Okay, musician from the Shoals. He was a friend I met through playing gigs. He was playing like Humphreys and places. And he had actually owned the Muscle Shoals Sound building at one time.
Really?
Before it was renovated.
Wow.
And he invited me up one day to just check it out. So I'm like, hell yeah, I know the history a little bit.
Yeah.
So I started going into Shoals, and I got some experience and some context around the history there. And then I started playing with Angela Hacker, who's from there as well. And I started to really meet people from the area. And then we started playing at Flow Bam up there. But I think this all happened a little bit before that. But Angela was in a band with me at Plan B, and the original Plan B was her. And so all that kind of happened. And I ended up in the studio with her and her now husband, James LeBlanc. And in the studio that day was David Hood, who's one of the original Swampers, which is the backing band in the 60s and 70s for Aretha Franklin. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they did Brown Sugar at their studio. This was their studio they did it at, actually. And so I'm in the studio with David Hood hanging out. And of course I know who he is by now. And I'm pretty good on the history by this point. And this is after I think they made the movie too. So I was even more in by then. But now I have an opportunity. I'm sitting with David Hood and a couple other guys. One of them played on one of Shania Twain's records, worked with Mutt Lange. So I was like, oh my God, I gotta ask these dudes these questions I've always wanted to ask. You know, I'm just curious, right? And I'm sitting with these guys thinking, how cool would it be to like be able to do this on a regular basis? Like sit down with these guys, you know, and learn the stories. They're telling me about being on American Bandstand and touring the United States and their stories, you know, and everybody knows David Hood's story a little bit because it's so famous, you know, it's in Sweet Home Alabama, right? Swampers. So that kind of jump-started the idea to do podcasting 7 years ago or whatever it's been. And so first I thought, well, it'd just be interesting to know their careers, like kind of like we're doing now, right?
Yeah, right.
Knowing about the person more. And so I started doing that initially. I think I went with, who did I go with first? Kurt Granger, maybe. No, yeah. I think it was Kurt Granger. It was my first podcast. He's an amp builder out of Birmingham, guy I've known for years, plays in a Tom Petty tribute band, done a lot of stuff. And then I had Damon Johnson on, I think second or in the first few, who Damon's played with Alice Cooper and Leonard Skinner. He's in Leonard Skinner now, and he's done all this stuff. So I thought it'd be really cool to sit down with these people and be able to pick their brains, you know, listen, not only know more about them, but learn how they did what it was they did. Yep. You know, like you asked me, how did you do that? And there's all kinds of insights into each person's story. And so I started to go through all my friends, like Angela, who I was in a band with. I interviewed her because she'd won Nashville Star TV show. So I wanted to know her background about the show, about that whole experience.
The whole process goes.
And then her husband was this hit songwriter on many country hits, modern day Bonnie and Clyde he wrote.
Okay.
So I interviewed him, and it just sort of snowballed into these amazing interviews with, I ended up interviewing one of the guys from Whitesnake, Joel Hoekstra, Steve Brown from Trickster, Larry Mitchell, who's a Grammy-winning guitar player who opened up for Steve Vai. And the final interview so far, it's not final, it's never final, with what I call Musical Journeys, which is the original podcast. But this is a crazy story. When I was a kid, in my 20s, I bought a book it's called Musicians in Tune. It's a psychology book about musicians. And what it explored was how people started. Same thing I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
And she was doing what I was doing, what everybody's doing now in podcasting in her book. She was interviewing famous musicians about their path coming up. And what I learned in the book was, wow, I'm not alone. Like they had the same experiences. They might have been shy. They might have played all the time in their bedroom.
Yeah.
So I had a real connection to this book. And so this is like 91, 92. So fast forward 30 years, 34 years, whatever it was. And I'm doing my newest podcast, Van Halen Stories, but I had this hankering to interview this woman. I was like, God, wouldn't it be cool? She ended up marrying Mick Fleetwood. She's the sister of Patty Boyd. Patty Boyd is famous because she is Layla from the song.
Wow.
She's the inspiration behind Layla. She married George Harrison and Eric Clapton. Yep. Remember, she left one for the other. Yep. And Jenny, her sister Patty and Jenny, went to India with the Beatles in '68.
Man,
so what?
Imagine that.
What kind of interview would that be, right? So I contacted her, and she lives in England, and she agreed to be on because her book that I had read was being reissued with new audio.
Okay.
Of the interviews with Harrison and some of those who had passed.
Yeah.
And so anyway, she had children with Mick Fleetwood, and I had her on. It was an amazing thing, I went from just my local people to this girl in a book 34 years ago that I was able to get on a video with me and talk about the Beatles. Yeah, so that whole process started, and then, as I mentioned, the story about Van Halen and this guy that I had wrote this blog that started that other branch that started with the other podcast on Van Halen. It sort of started a specialty thing, a niche on that. So that's how I ended up doing podcasting for the last, 7, 8, 9 years now.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you. The variety of people that you have on there. Mm-hmm. I'm like, how do you find these people? I mean, you just, okay, that person I want to talk to. But what's the initial? How do I even find to even ask them? I mean, how does that even work?
It's brutal.
Yeah,
it's brutal. Okay, so at first it was people I just kind of knew, right?
Yeah,
I had already had contact, but when you get up into George Lynch or Steve Stevens from Billy Idol or these kind of people, usually it's a PR person that you have to go through or an agent, and you got to find them, and you got to make a formal request, and then they may or may not even answer you. Now, I will say that sometimes you get lucky through social media. I got Steve Stevens straight up to send him a message. By this point, though, I think that he may have seen something I'd done.
Gotcha.
And so it was a lot easier to get him.
Yeah.
And by the time you get your channel to a certain level, because I've been working on this for 7, 8 years, right?
Yeah.
It's at almost 15,000 subscribers. It's had over 10 million views, 10.5 million views in its lifetime. When you got an agent or a PR person on the other side, you have to submit the business plan of it. Is it worth
your time?
Is it worth the guys from Def Leppard's time? So far, not. I have been making the request.
Well, that's what another thing I was going to ask you about that too is, your motivation to keep going, for you said 7, 8 years now?
Yeah.
So looking back at your channel, I mean, you've got such a wide range. I mean, you got one on there, it's like 9 million views, the one from Stevie Wonder.
Yeah, Stevie Wonder, yeah.
And then others that are 300, then everything else in between.
Yeah.
So what keeps you motivated to keep doing it when you put so much work into it, and then you got like...
It doesn't matter which one it is, too, because, one that did, George Lynch was 36 minutes long, has 83,000 views, around that, 84 maybe. The guy I did last week, it took just as long to do it.
No.
It didn't matter.
Right.
Right now, you've got your celebrity guest, right? And the thing with Van Halen is, some of your celebrity guests have insights, like George Lynch. He was around for all of that.
Mm-hmm.
He toured with him. He was close. Steve Stevens was really close to him, too. But then you have people who weren't as close, but they were in the neighborhood, physically the neighborhood they lived in at the time, and were seeing them and met them more in passing. But they add context. Like the guy I just had, David Perry. David was such a kind of musicologist type guy. You never know, though, what their personality, like you didn't know what I was going to get into, right? You didn't know what depth or whatever. Same thing with David. I just found out so much about the local area and what music those guys were listening to. One of the things I learned was that they were listening to Skynyrd a lot, which kind of threw me.
Yeah.
Like, you guys in Pasadena, California were into Skynyrd? You're like, I would have never thought that.
Yeah.
The Van Halens were listening to Skynyrd? And apparently, even though Van Halen didn't mention that, Eddie didn't, although all the other bands he mentioned, Sabbath, Rainbow, or not Rainbow, Deep Purple, they were all into that, So what he was giving me was this broader context to the city. The Van Halens grew up in a very small 800 square foot bungalow home in Pasadena. Immigrants, they didn't have much. David Lee Roth lived in a giant house only 3 miles away, 12,000 square foot mansion.
Yeah.
And the dichotomy in the town. So what I was trying to understand was, how is it so that you have like immigrants here, but you have super rich here?
Now, how did you guys even get together?
Basically, I saw one of his stories online, because what I do is I belong to a bunch of Van Halen pages, right? People will post their personal stories. Some of them are sometimes employees or worked with Van Halen, or sometimes I know their story from historical, some from all the research, and I'll know people I haven't gotten that I need to get. Like I got their first sound man on 2 episodes back, Tom Broderick. And I knew that he went on that first tour with them. I knew that he did sound for them in the early days. I knew that he was right there. He took Eddie to gigs in his van, or Eddie and him drove in his van to gigs when they were before all of this.
No.
So I knew Tom about him from another documentary that was way older, like 20 years ago. And eventually, man, you get to a point with some of these people where they feel like I do, like we don't have forever.
Yeah.
Here.
Yep.
And, this is a sad thing that, our friend David passed away, but you documented David, I documented a friend of mine named Mark Phillips in Birmingham who passed away.
No.
And I tell you what, man, after he passed, people were talking about Mark. A lot of people came to my channel to kind of be with him one more time.
That's weird that you say that. The same thing happened to me with David.
Yeah, right?
I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know if I should take that down.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first comments that came up was pretty positive.
Mm-hmm.
And then I tell you what sealed the deal for me was Mike had reached out to me and said, "Hey, man, I really appreciate you doing that." And at the time I felt very awkward of that being out there. I didn't want people to go dissect it. And
well, because it was pretty close.
It was real close time-wise. And but Mike, he didn't even tell me, hey, keep this. That wasn't even a conversation, but just him saying that that helped him out, and that he's got that forever to go back and look at.
Sure.
So
exactly,
that
it's documentation of a life, right?
It kind of solidified why I started this in the first place.
Exactly, bro.
Exactly. If we get 10 views on something, or
You never,
10 million.
You never know, man.
I'm not really. Of course, everybody would like to be, have the more people look at it. But
Sure.
if it's not, it'll always be there for whoever wants to see it.
Sure.
And
Sure.
that's one of the main reasons why
Well,
we're doing it.
I'm here with you. I'm telling my story, and when you ask me, obviously, I understand exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Because I've been there,
Sure.
right,
Yeah.
with this friend of mine, and I'm leaving behind a document.
Yep.
Will you need it tomorrow? I hope not.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But I am leaving you this, and I'm leaving myself forever online with my different podcasts and things. And I think about that, from a perspective of like with Eddie, they didn't do this. This was before this technology,
Right.
And when you get to a point where you're Eddie Van Halen, it's so difficult to like know who's
Genuine.
Yeah, who's going to rip you off, man? Because that's what he experienced right out of the gate. I told you, he had that guitar that they started selling without any. They didn't stripe it exactly like his, but obviously it was his guitar, right? And unfortunately, and it happened with multiple people in the industry. I think they just thought, I don't know, maybe it was the 70s and 80s, and maybe people were a little more loose about that stuff then, but about contracts and stuff, but that really hurt him. And so when you're that famous, even when I approach somebody for a podcast, you got to come with something to sway them that you're genuine.
Yeah.
And that you're not there to rip them off or just to use them for their celebrity.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, like if I do somebody unknown, that actually gives me not only more context, but more credit that I'm actually who I say I am, and I am doing what I say I'm going to do, which is my views. I look at it like I really want people. I love to be able to get a guy like George Lynch. I mean, it's like a dream come true. It's a guy I grew up listening to just as much as Eddie Van Halen. But what George Lynch does is not only give us his story, he gives the guy who doesn't have his celebrity the chance to tell his story and get viewed.
Yeah.
Like David Perry, his story, what it does is it rounds out the story in a way that George Lynch can't round out.
Yeah.
And it's a very important part of what I do. And so with a person like David, we have a story now, and we can learn from everybody's story, right?
Absolutely.
Like, even if it's like within your podcast becomes little lessons that we've all learned, right? Doesn't matter if it's Van Halen or it's personal on like career path or whatever. There's little nuggets of knowledge that we leave behind.
Sure.
And that's what podcasts are great. I mean, I think that's what has made it this massive thing. It's blowing up.
It personalizes everything too. Because I mean, you can't, even if it's an hour and a half documentary, you're not getting all the story. You're getting
exactly
what can fit in that hour and a half. I mean, we don't have a timeline here. I mean, we can stop right now. We're good.
Sure.
Or we can go for another hour.
Right.
It's when we think the story's done. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And that's why I enjoy listening to other people's podcasts so much too, because even for believe it or not, even for news stuff, I watch podcasts. Even if I don't know if they even know what they're talking about.
Sure.
At least I'm not getting something force fed down me that they got their own agenda. You know what I mean? So,
you really have to take in the information.
Yep.
And then you kind of have to correlate things,
right. You can bounce it off.
Like with the Van Halen story, okay, it's there's a lot of mystery. And so my friend Greg Renoff, who I have to give a lot of credit for my podcast, wrote the book on Van Halen, literally, right? He wrote the book on their early days. And he was the researcher who did all that before anybody was doing a podcast. And he got me interested in the deeper stories. And he helps me a little bit, feed me some people, ideas, kind of like just helps me, points me in the right direction a lot of times. Sometimes I'll find them on my own and I'll go, what do you think? It's good. Or sometimes I'll go to an early days person who I've already interviewed and say, this person, what do you think? Is it good? Just to make sure that it's going to be, good and entertaining and all that. And, but yeah, if you didn't go for the deep story, like Greg's book is this deep story about Van Halen. You can't get that in a documentary.
Sure.
You couldn't get it all in without it being freaking...
It'd be like a series.
Right. So what is my podcast?
It's a series.
It's a series of hours and hours and hours of information.
Yeah.
It's like a book. That's how I looked at it. Like when I first started doing that, I kind of worried, like if the Van Halen camp, the son, Wolfie or any of those people around them, how they would respond to this. Like this whole idea. And I worried a little bit about it, but then I thought, this is my book. You can't stop a writer from writing a book.
Well, not only that, but I can almost guarantee that those people don't know all these stories.
They don't.
So what a place to go,
right?
If you want to know about your dad,
even your son.
Yeah, I mean,
can you imagine?
Yeah, I don't think.
Can you imagine if my dad? I mean, my dad's friends all did a thing, and I would learn stuff about my dad I never.
There's so much stuff I want to know about my dad that I don't know.
Wouldn't that be cool?
That nobody knows.
Wouldn't that be freaking cool?
That'd be awesome,
right?
Yeah. So
wouldn't that be cool?
You can't complain about that.
I think that's a wonderful thing, and I think one day, if he ever does decide to come on, it'll be a wonderful opportunity to interface with him and
sure.
And I have nothing but love and inspiration from his father. And one moment I got to spend with him, it was just a mind-blowing experience because you remember I was a kid with him on my wall. And to be able to go up to him and tell him, that, dude, I've been waiting for 30 years just to shake your hand and tell you thank you for this because my life has been altered since I was 13. Because I saw you on TV. And to him, that may not mean anything. It's just like, it's sort of like a side, like somebody would say something like that to me, like, dude, you really inspired me to do this or whatever. And it's really cool, right? But it's kind of like, really? Like me? Like it's that imposter syndrome thing where you kind of like don't feel like you deserve that. Mm. And when you're Eddie Van Halen, what do you...
Well, just think how many times he's probably heard that.
I mean, how much do you think that goes on? And it goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And he was so famous for his smile, And, but underneath that smile was a guy that was really anxious. And it blew me away when you think about how shy he was to how many people he would give time, no matter where he was, would give him that photograph and that smile.
Yeah.
No matter how hard it was for him, he made, it's funny because, we're none of us are perfect. And Eddie Van Halen was not perfect like anybody. He was just a guy. But I think what separated him from most people was that he was that guy, the famous guy, but he was also a regular guy. Mm. And that he understood that it meant so much to people just to be able to say, hey.
I'm sure he had somebody in his life that he felt the same way that people do to him, so he probably remembered that.
Yeah, I'm sure, he had met people and had gone wrong.
Yeah.
He had met Clapton and had gone wrong, his hero. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a good exchange, and he had met Blackmore, I think, and it didn't go so good. And, I think he was that hurt. It hurts when your heroes aren't what you, they turn out to be not so friendly. Yep. I was able to meet him at a very good time in his life at the Smithsonian when he was there for that big interview that he did. It's one of the only major interviews he's out there, and I was there that night, and I had a chance to not only see it in person, but be able to meet him afterwards and shake his hand, and he was in a great place. And I felt like fate kind of had stepped in and put me there at the right moment. Mm. And I almost feel like, honestly, since 13 years old, there was a reason why that happened to me that night. It was like when the hair stands on the back of your neck and something's transformative just happened. Mm. Whether it's an amazing sports moment or, okay, everybody has this once in a while. This moment of absolute inspiration and like, wow, that was just incredible, right? Mm. Whatever happened that night was like that. And how it happens through a 20-inch TV blows my mind, bro. But whatever that happened is why I'm with you right now. And it's because one guy got on stage and just did what he loved. So it's not really about, he was never thinking about, I'm going to inspire thousands of millions of people. Right. He was just thinking about, I want to go play that guitar on stage. But what happened was something much bigger. And I think what I'm trying to capture in the podcast is the deeper, meaning of that thing that happens when you transform other people's lives. Because all of these people that are coming forward, they've all been transformed by him.
Yeah. Just about every one of the people in the band that I've done so far can attribute it to one person.
Of course.
I mean, I'm by far any kind of great, I like playing drums.
Sure.
Whether I'm good or not, doesn't really matter. I like it. And I can tell you what inspired me to do it was John Bonham,
sure.
which I'm sure most drummers have that same.
And you have that
feeling.
thing. You have that thing where you go to Neil Peart and John Bonham, and your bass players are anywhere from Sting to Jocko or Geddy Lee. You hear like these technical super masters of the instruments. And I think that if we could go back to a master like Beethoven or Mozart, and he's on a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's he going to tell us?
That'd be something.
Are we going to see the crazy guy on Amadeus or not?
Yeah.
And what kind of personality was he? That's what with Van Halen that hasn't really been uncovered about Eddie Van Halen. Yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough to interview Damon Johnson, who my friend that he grew up not far from here in Geraldine, over in Sand Mountain area, and was inspired by Van Halen at that point. And he went on tour with Van Halen, right? So he's backstage with Eddie, and in fact, the tour manager says to him, "Hey, Eddie's down there in the dressing room. Go say hey." Can you imagine now? Now you were a kid, and he blew you away. So he had such a strong reaction to Eddie Van Halen. After the concert in 1980, he sat in the seat and cried. Okay, that's how powerful that was. Yeah. And he said that night, he says, "I'm going to do this." Now, fast forward from 1980 to 1995, 15 years later, he's sharing the stage with Eddie Van Halen. Same stage, same room.
Wow.
Same place he was at.
Yeah.
Right? Is that
That's
crazy?
A full turnaround.
Right. Okay. So he's on tour with him, and later on he comes off. And Damon was one of those people like me. He's just so busy, man. I couldn't hardly ever get a moment with him. And one day I finally did. He was back in town. And I said, "Dude, it's been years now. I got to know.
No.
What was it like to be with Eddie, hanging out with him?" And I tell this every time. He goes, "Dude, he was just a regular guy." Mm-hmm. And I looked at him, I was like, "Dude, he was not a regular." That was the guy who played guitar. He played Eruption. Remember Van Halen 1? That's the same dude. No. And he goes, "No, man, he was just, the way he related it to me was like, once he got you in his space, he took that." And a lot of people have said this. And
there was no more a guitar player. It was more of a person. Yeah.
All of a sudden, he turns into a person. Yeah. And he had some kind of weird, I don't know, maybe I'm inserting this or whatever, but voodoo where he made you feel immediately like he was a regular guy. Mm. He had a way of turning this superstar stuff off. Yeah. And how does that happen so quickly? But that's what Damon said. And I had seen that and heard that from many people on my podcast, that he had like a superpower. Mm. Or maybe I'm just reading into it, but it seemed like it, that he had a way of trying to redirect you away from this thing where you were starstruck. Kind of thing. I think it made him feel more comfortable if you weren't. In fact, he liked, I met people on my podcast who were not musicians, who meant that actually were with him in the studio. And when he would ask them, like, "What do you know about Van Halen?" And he'd be like, "Well, I only know, he maybe Jump," and they don't really know anything. He goes,
"You're my guy.
You and I are going to get along just fine." And this is something that he reveled in, is when they didn't really know much about him. Yeah. I think he just liked to connect on a regular guy basis. And so when he would be with other musicians, he would try to kind of like get away from that a little bit. Yeah. But then they all come away with like going, "I can't believe that happened. I can't believe that they, I feel like I'm sitting with Bill Neal." not Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah, right.
Right? It becomes like a regular guy thing.
Yeah.
And it's such an endearing quality about him that I want to get from his wife and I want to get from his son. I think my ultimate interview would be Valerie and his son, because I want to know more about the guy behind
The Family Guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Eddie Van Halen, it's a funny story, doesn't like to be called Eddie. I don't know if you know that.
Nope.
Most people don't know that, but he liked to be called Ed or Edward. Ed primarily is what I've heard. Most of his close friends say Ed. I think the Eddie thing became a thing during his popularity, his fame, and everybody would call him Eddie, 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 hey, Eddie, Eddie, and people would, when they were fans or whatever, and it got annoying, I think, to him, and he didn't like it, and so he wanted to be disassociated with it. And I think I remember this specifically. Maybe somebody in the comments will say something, but I believe that he said, I become Eddie Van Halen when I have to put the screws to somebody or I have to be tough. He becomes the superstar. If I have to be that guy, it's a different guy.
I wonder if that's his real name.
Yeah.
Coming from the Netherlands.
Yeah, Van Halen's his actual name.
Okay. Eddie or Ed.
Edward Lodewijk. Edward Lodewijk Van Halen he was born in Amsterdam and lived in a town outside of Amsterdam for a little while, and then he came over on the boat. And he played on the boat when he was a kid, and his dad played over on the boat to help pay. He brought a piano with him and $50. Lived in some halfway houses.
Yeah.
I've been to them. I've been to those places. I've been to the houses where they lived when they were in transition.
So what are you doing with the what's your future plans for your podcast? I mean, I know you're still wanting to get different interviews, but are you doing anything in between, or do you really have a plan that you're setting out, or is it just?
Yeah, it's one of those things. I kind of fly by the seat of the pants. Yeah. Like there's one we're working on right now, a multiple guest one, and we're trying to bust a myth. Like Mythbusters. Remember the show?
Okay. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So, like, there's always, and if you watch anything on the internet nowadays, like with Joe Rogan or whatever on his podcast, they're always trying to find out information on history, maybe evolution, or things that we don't, we kind of not sure really know. And then we're finding things out that we didn't know, right? And so what we're trying to find out right now is about some of his guitar setup, some of the things he did. When he was ripped off in the early days, his brother had this foresight to say, hey, don't show them this thing you're doing with the tap and turn your back. Don't give that away. This is your thing. And if you turn around, everybody's going to know, and they're going to go do it before you do it.
Yeah.
So they were always kind of on guard, right? And they also did this thing that was constant. It was just total misdirection, misinformation.
Yeah.
They did it on purpose. Okay, they did it to not only to misdirect technique or, in this particular case, it was what he played through on stage. There's always been this narrative of exactly what he did and how he did it. And it really kills Van Halen fans. They hate this when you might not know that thing because he might have not told you the whole truth because that's what he did. And so one of the myth-busting things we're doing is a deep dive on some of his gear that he used on the studio record, specifically the first one. All guitar players look at that as the ultimate rock guitar sound, and that's where today's, again, innovator, his sound made everybody want to have that sound.
No.
And it wasn't really readily available. And we were still trying to figure out exactly how he did it. And we think there was other elements to it. And I've had somebody come forward who was a tech back in the day, somebody that has never come forward with information. Now, I have a little bit of documentation for it and seems legit.
Yeah.
But the Van Halen community will lose their minds. Okay. They will lose their minds. This is like taking a piece of history and chucking it on
There
them.
really is a Bigfoot.
Right. If you saw Bigfoot, it'd be like that. Like people say, it's for real, man. And then nobody believes that, right? But then when you see it, it's a different thing. So the idea we had was the person that came to me with this information was a friend of this guy, and now I'm in contact with the guy. And so we have the information, and we are wanting to roll this out. So he's been on, the one guy's been on, and kind of soft rolled it out. And of course, a lot of no's. There's no way.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And, but as I do research through, now, the whole time I'm preparing for a round table is what we're going to do. Okay. Multiple guests worldwide. Experts, like tone questing experts, people that are like the nerds, like total. They do this every day in their bedroom trying to figure out what that thing was, right? And so I've been researching through the local community guys. Did you see this? Did you see that? Did you ever see that? And none of them have been able to say yes, but I'll say most likely.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so we're going to have a worldwide, this is the plan. We got to get it together. So it's not done yet, but a worldwide multi-guest deep dive. And I'm going to have Los Angeles, London, Huntsville, New York, maybe another place, all at once. Talking about this one myth.
Yeah.
Or truth.
Right.
We'll see. But I'm like with my podcast, I'm not married to any particular history with Van Halen because they misdirect it all the time.
Mm.
And so I think, and what I found is that there's a lot of things that we don't still know that they hid.
Yeah.
Some of the people that were involved that were firsthand were his brother. He's writing a book. It's coming out in the fall. So we'll see if there's something in there to bust certain myths. Their engineer is friends with my friend, Greg, but it's very private. And it's only done one interview in 40 years. And he did it with my buddy, and that was print.
Yeah.
He won't do a podcast.
All right.
So the people who could say definitively, and even now, you got to remember that's their memories at that point. Who knows how folks that were on those things?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like an ongoing process of interviewing people and then figuring out where that road goes. So I'm always thinking about like, okay, this guy can fill out this part of the history. This guy was with him at this particular event. These fans were at this show, like Us Festival, 1983. Had Kurt Granger, who was my very first guest, back on because he was at the Us Festival in 1983. Saw Van Halen there, drove across country. So we did a special show. 2 guys, one from California, one from Alabama. Both were there. We did a show on that show. So the show that my video that started my whole thing, I'm looking for people who are there.
Kind of like a Oak Island mystery. You ever watch Oak Island?
It is, man.
You find one piece and it just totally changes the direction that you're going.
This is the whole thing for me. Like for this, it is. I've always, you're talking about different things. I'm constantly trying to think of another way to present something to make it more exciting, like a reality TV with Oak Island or whatever. But more or less, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
This is a dive into history. And the thing is, it's not so far back that we can prove it.
Yeah.
I mean, Oak Island is a long-term, hundreds-year thing. Maybe thousands, right? Right? The whole thing is amazing, when you get back into it. But that's one of the things about this that I love, and I don't know exactly where I'm headed.
Yeah.
So when I shoot off emails all the time to guests. Doesn't matter if they're famous, not famous. If they have a connection, and they got a good story, I want them. And obviously, like I said, celebrity guests help me maintain viewership because I want to keep people engaged.
Sure.
And that will keep people watching everybody, every show. That's important.
Yeah.
You don't want them to miss the most important details. Like when you go through this podcast, I saw how you do like clips, right? and I'll do clips too sometimes, but I think it's something that they need to like really, like, this is a history that was changed that you don't know about. Like if I told you the guitar stuff, you know, that might be something that you use for a user, for not a user, a watcher of your podcast who doesn't know a lot about Van Halen. Yeah. You know, because they would be like, "Oh, I've never heard that." Of course, in my world, it's like 101.
Yeah, well,
right? 101.
I can tell you, if you put a short out just with that, that would probably
draw people
to be like, "Well, if I didn't know that, what else has it got?" And then probably bring it right back to you, and then they're going to open up like, "Holy crap,
this guy won't shut up."
Well, no, not that, but I mean, it's like, man, there's so much other stuff that I had no idea about.
This guy won't shut up. My wife knew when I left. She was like, probably like, he's not going to be back for tonight. He'll probably in bed by the time he gets home. He's freaking. Yeah, I just, I don't know. You know, I was born a Gemini, so I got the talkative thing, and I think, you know, that's true. You know,
well, that's a good thing for me because I'm not a talkative person. So,
well, that's the thing, though. Like, you know, dynamic of conversation is what makes podcasts cool, right? It's the way that you sit down at a table together and it just, whatever happens. Yeah. It's like bands, you know? Yeah. Like when you get together to jam with somebody that you never played with, you know how that's going to go. It could go for crap or it could be awesome.
I've never been in a band, but I've played with many bands.
So
if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah. I remember something about you wanting to sit in, right?
Yeah.
I remember that. Did we ever get you sit in? Probably not, did we?
Oh, yeah. Well, Donnie got me back there.
Did he?
Yeah. y'all didn't know it.
Just the boat dock thing?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Yeah. Okay. See, I remember that. I do remember that. It came into my head, but yeah.
Because Donnie was over there playing. He was watching me. He's like,
I remember that. You got him played with. I forgot what song it was. It's been a while. Is that AC/DC or something?
It was probably Hard to Handle.
Oh, you're right. It was.
Because I don't know if we had my buddy come up there because he usually sings too.
Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah, I think David was with us then. If I remember, is that the dock?
Yeah.
On the boat.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that was a cool gig because we were playing like on a
dock.
floating dock. But
yeah, that's a whole different story. How that all happened.
Yeah, crazy. But yeah, and the music, man, that's the thing about music. It's for everybody.
No.
You know? It doesn't matter if you just plunk around or what, because we all listen to music. Yeah. And it does something to us, right?
As shitty of the player I am, I'm the one that's having the most fun in the room, you know? Because I'm having fun, you know?
Right, because it's exciting, right?
Yeah.
Because you know what? When you do it for 40 years or whatever, it's still exciting.
Yeah.
I haven't watched Mike's, but I need to watch all Mike's. And because I had Mike on mine too, you know? And, but when I get with Mike or somebody like that, we're there for the same, just instantaneous, man.
No.
It's the same thing with the Van Halen community. When we're together, we all were there for the same reason.
No.
And, you know, it brings us together. And music brings people together. That's the thing. Like when you start to get down the line with it, like, you know, past the 20s, and you start to realize like what's important about music, you realize it's a connection with people. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if it's for 5 people or 5,000 people.
Yep.
Right? My job is to go up there and give people a little bit of a break from their daily whatever.
Sure.
And I get a little break too, because I get to relax with you guys and maybe play on a boat dock and play some unique plays.
Don't think about putting your schedule together.
Exactly. You know, I get to do the fun part,
sure.
Which when I look at my schedule, like once it's done, that's the relief, because now I know I can just go play, you know, now I just do my thing. Yep. And that's a nice feeling once I get to the point where I'm not chasing. That's why I chase my schedule so hard, is because I want to get to the point where I'm not doing this all year long.
No. Yeah.
I would rather just put it to bed and go to work.
No.
You know, and I love the work part. You know, I love to go and set up. I mean, it's frustrating, man. Don't get me wrong. It's hard work. It's sometimes something's breaking or gears going, something's wrong. It's not sounding right, you know, but man, other nights, dude, you walk out of there and you're like that. You walk out and you go, that's why I do this.
No.
You go, no one could ever take that night away from me.
Mhm.
You know, when I was saying earlier about telling Kelly, you know, about the 6 years we spent together, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter what happened after that 6 years. It matters what happened during that 6 years. And that 6 years is there forever. See, that's something I learned from the 15 before that,
Right.
was that all of those experiences I had all those years ago, I cherish every one of those.
Yeah.
You know, and the high points, the low points, all of it. It's my life, you know?
Yeah.
And so when you're a musician, it's just about going out and doing something, you know?
Yep.
And having an exciting moment. It's like, I don't know, for some people it might be like going to a stock car race and seeing that and getting really excited about that. Mine's putting on a guitar and going and playing.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're into cars, or you like to race, or, you know, everybody has their thing.
Sure.
And guitars just happen to be the thing that somehow got thrown in my lap.
Well, it's lucky for us that we have people like you that can do it, because I mean, I don't have the discipline
Hey, you know what?
to put that much into it.
You know what, though?
I enjoy watching other people.
Truthfully, man, though, if I wouldn't have started when I started,
No.
I don't think that I would have been able to do it, because it is such a process. Like I said with that discussion about 10 years, if you're starting in your 30s, well, like say you already had talent, like Kelly had talent. She was a singer. She already could sing. Wasn't like she never sang or never done anything before. She's never done anything professionally. And so there's this period that you got to go through where you got to learn all this stuff and work yourself to a point.
No.
And it's just part of it, you know. And if you don't do it, you miss stuff. Like I heard Sting say this one time about, I don't want to bag on American Idol or whatever, but I think it's good for the exposure. But I don't think it's manufactured a bit, you know. But what he said was, if you start out on American Idol, you've missed so much of what you need to know before you get to American Idol. If you get thrown out into that world before you've even had any exposure to this.
Yeah, I've heard lots of people say that about that.
It's like getting sent to a job that you weren't trained for.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you got the raw talent, skill, but
well, not only that, when you do it, and let's say you win, can you imagine how much they're getting screwed?
Oh yeah, they're under contract.
Yeah, and
they're not aware.
They just think that, okay, well, this is how it is.
Yeah, you know,
they didn't learn those lessons from the beginning of, hey, make sure you don't do this and don't do that.
Sign this contract, you know, because one of the things they do, at least from what I've understood, is that they'll actually put you on a thing where you can't entertain or go play anywhere or work anywhere.
Yeah, you have to do their schedule for like the first year or two,
something
or
like that.
Yeah,
you get put into this non-functioning status, which is crazy, you know. But also, if you sign a contract, you don't read that contract, or you don't have somebody read it who's a lawyer, and who has your best interest in hand.
I think they have to sign those things at the beginning, right?
It depends. I think what I've heard is,
hey, if you get to a certain point, you have to sign this, or
you're not going on. Yeah, and I think that's the way it works. But you know, again, it's really about, when I look at it and I go, look how many succeeded and how many didn't. At that, it's a ton who didn't.
Yeah,
it's a very small number. I mean, everybody can say Carrie Underwood. You know, she's one of the few. Miranda Lambert.
We have a local guy here.
Yeah,
and,
Bo Bice.
Yeah.
Well, and Bo got caught in the middle of all the politics of business. You know, you got this guy, you know, who's the most powerful man in the music business, was part of it at the time, and he's giving you this is what you need to do. You know, you need to sell records, man.
Yeah.
Right? And Clive Davis was one of the most famous producers and people in the business forever. But I don't think Bo Bice agreed with him.
Yeah.
And I don't think Kelly Clarkson agreed with him either. So there's been some bumps along the roads of some of the most powerful people in the music business. And you probably would have never thought you'd be in that position.
Right.
Or never prepared to be in that position. With
And that comes to the point that you're saying. You got to, pay your dues.
like, you were in the military, right?
Yep.
Okay. So if you didn't get your training, they're not going to stick you on no helicopter.
No.
Go here, take the stick, bro.
See how you do.
Right. Now, if you're like, you have some gift, you might could, be showing a few things and get yourself around a little bit. But I bet you'd probably end up in a ditch on your head if you didn't know all the things you needed to know. Right. And that's kind of where you're at in the music business. You really got to go out and work to get that education. It's on the job, man. So much of it. And that's the thing about American Idol or whatever. It's not really on the job. That's not a normal thing, right? That's a TV show. That's
and not only that. There's not how much information is there out there to even prepare you some, for like if I was going to go work at if I was going to be an engineer,
sure,
even if I didn't go to college, there's enough stuff on the internet to be able to tell me,
sure,
to a certain extent,
sure,
to be able to get by a little bit.
Yeah,
but there's not really that much information out there to look for to say, hey, watch out for
this contractual thing.
Yeah,
sure.
they're going to put this in there, and
they sneak it in.
Yeah,
I mean, when we were in our 20s, we're trying to do that original band. One of our friends who'd been signed to a major record label gave us the contract. It's like this, right? He goes, "Here you go, read up."
Yeah,
and I'm like, we all have copies, 5 of us, and this is how serious we were. We were in our 20s, early 20s, reading music contracts, trying to figure out what we were going to get ourselves into. At least we had a clue about where we were headed. We're trying to head. And when I looked at that contract, all I could say to you is like, I don't think I even want to know what's in this thing. And that is the trap. That's the thing, right? Because if you don't know and you don't have a lawyer, you don't know what's in there.
No.
And you should have seen some of the stuff in there that you're like, really? Like, that's all we get? And we don't get that? And how long?
No.
And, we were reading, we were lucky because we had people that were mentors who were pointing us at certain information that we could get.
Yeah.
And they gave us it, And there's a video I put out. I don't think I put it out there on my stuff, but where my buddy actually has this whole thing about record deals, and we're reading through this while we're making the deals. Because we had the connections and the people to get us to we got our tape on the desk of one of the most powerful people in the music business today. Irving Azoff was his name. At the time, he was just a record label president. Now he's the most powerful man in the business. Runs Live Nation, and I think they changed the name. I'm not sure, but he was the most powerful and still one of the most powerful. He managed Van Halen, managed the Eagles. And we're 20 years old. We have no clue how powerful this guy's going to be, right? This guy ends up being the most powerful guy in the music business. He was a powerful man then. But it just goes to show you the kind of players we were dealing with at 23, thinking we knew what we were going to do. We had no clue, right? That might have taken us, Van Halen said they were $2 million in debt when they got back from their first tour. They'd been touring 12 months straight, and they owe $2 million to the record label, because they front all of your expenses, tour expenses, all your recording expenses, any expenses, basically. The necklaces, they bought them. Wrong answer. That they charged themselves. They charged them for their necklaces. And they say this in one of their videos, but basically they had given them as gifts to the band, but they didn't charge back to them.
Jeez.
So even down to the necklaces. That's how detailed some of the back pay was. And people don't realize that it's a loan. If you ever get into the business, there's always going to be the piper to pay. I think about Taylor Swift. This is a good thing about something to say about people who would want to be Taylor Swift, for example. Just think about this. Taylor Swift, what she's liable for every time she goes out every day for a show. Okay, how many people are working in that stadium that get paid that day for working the hot dog stand or whatever, the food, right? How many people is that? Okay, how many people are on her crew? Okay, how many people is that? Now, how many people in the stadium? Now, she is liable to come out on the stage and blow them away every time.
Mm-hmm.
And all 90,000 people depend on her. That's a tall order.
Sure.
Anybody can somehow, I mean, I don't care how rich you are. You still got to deliver.
Yeah.
I mean, that is some serious pressure. So, you better be careful what you wish for.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
So, Eddie Van Halen, he loved guitar. But if you listen to what he says about his father, it was more about providing for his family and getting his mom and dad to a point where they didn't have to work so hard.
Yeah.
And, yeah, man, there's like, but then he ends up super famous. And then it just blows up. And then
you really can't turn something like that off. Well, I guess you can, but to a certain extent,
it's very difficult.
It's always going to be there, regardless if you quit. That doesn't mean you're forgot about,
No, not if you were like him, and I always wonder about how much that pressure, impacted his life as his length of his life, because of course he had all kinds
of
his
relationships.
Of course, substance problems. You had all kinds of issues that were going on that really go back to, you remember that back in that time, we didn't really have anything for anxiety. You just drank or you smoked pot or you did drugs. Or that's what you did for that back then. And, not that pharmaceuticals are a whole lot better probably than a lot of things, but they are something if you're in a bad way and you don't want to be, you don't want to end your life early. Unfortunately, he didn't live to be older than his father, but he lived hard. He lived big, man. Sure. I mean, think about the life he lived.
Yeah.
He lived it so fast and so big that he just didn't make it till the, 70 or whatever. He wanted to live older than his dad. He said that. I think he said he wanted to outlive his dad and he didn't. But man, yeah, the pressure. That's a thing to think about as a musician. It's something like almost thank my lucky stars that it didn't turn out that way.
Yeah.
Like, that Garth Brooks song, my mom used to always say that. What was that thing? It was basically the story. Basically the sentiment is thank God for unanswered prayers was that song, right?
Yep.
Right? And sometimes if you're not built for something, you might not want to go down that path.
Well, I got real lucky because, there's a lot of things that I was pursuing that didn't happen, and I'm glad it didn't.
Right?
You know what I mean?
You know that, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the way things, when you get older, you realize that some things just weren't meant to be. And there's probably a good reason and why, it turned out for you one way, it turned out different for another person. My parents used to always tell this story where they were really worried about me, about being so obsessed with music because I was hardcore, I did nothing but that. And I would look at them, I was like, at some point I turned around and said, I got my friends and I could be in a lot worse stuff than what I'm doing right now in this bedroom by myself. And they were like, oh, yeah, you're right. We know you're friends.
Yeah.
You just keep playing that guitar.
That's right. Here's another one.
Right here, get some more. Yeah, so they were always really supportive of it. But yeah, man, but I had good parents. That's another huge thing in the business too, is if you're going to be doing American Idol or whatever, and it seems like they always look for stories, though, of downtrodden situations that were really tough. And you got to remember those people were already kind of in a negative world, and then they get thrown into this crazy thing of high pressure. Mm-hmm. Some people, Taylor Swift apparently handles it. Maybe. We don't know that for sure. We just know what we see. And some people can do it. Can handle that. But some people get into it and then they can't handle it. And then they do things and then they feel terrible for doing those things. And then it turns into this spiral. And it's awful to see that happen to somebody, man. I watched my bass player do that. And we have all seen that happen, right? And to people that shouldn't, we loved.
Yeah.
I loved him. He was one of my best friends, man. He was one of those guys who would he would, do anything for me. And he was the guy in school, like when everybody was doing drugs and drinking and whatever, and I wasn't the guy doing it. He was like, well, leave him alone. If he doesn't want to do that, let him alone.
Yeah.
Don't bully him because he doesn't want to be drunk.
Mm.
I drank later in life, but at that age, I had an uncle who was schizophrenic, and I saw what that could do in my family. Now, again, this is all personal, but how one thing could be fine for somebody else, and then me I'd be in la la land.
Yeah.
So I was kind of aware of that as a youngster because of the genetic component of it. And so I didn't do anything like that initially, and I kept really clean until I was probably in my 20s. And I had a little bit more sense. Not a lot.
Yeah, right.
I still screwed around and did stupid stuff. But, but my parents always brought me back to the planet Earth, and pretty disciplinarian. So they made sure I stayed out of trouble. I kind of worry about the kids these days. That's
a lot more pressure in kids these days, I think, than what we had. I mean, we had pressure, but we didn't have everything out there like they do now.
Oh yeah, with social media.
I mean, it's just crazy.
And then being so accessible on social media. I mean, it's great on one hand. It's from their world. It's like I can't imagine what it's like to be. You can be bullied online.
If I had stuff that I did when I was a kid, I would post it online.
You'd be in trouble, right? I'd be in trouble too.
Oh man,
I'd still be in trouble for a lot of that.
Well, hey man, I've been keeping here for way too long.
I appreciate it, man.
So I'm gonna
thank you so much.
Cut this off, and I really appreciate you coming out. Is there anything that I haven't brought up that you want to talk about, or?
No, man, I really appreciate you doing it. Whenever I see somebody doing this podcasting thing, I had a couple other people that were interested in getting involved in this, and I think it's no matter how many people are doing this, it's a good thing because it's catching a lot of good information for the future. This is the books of the future.
Sure.
It's the archives of the future. I think back even to YouTube in the early days when I was first putting videos there. And I go back through them now and just like, okay, you wanted to know about me, right? You just go online. You can find it. You can see what I did. It's all there. I was just a person that also documented a lot. So that was something that's why podcasting came natural to me, was because my friends and I were all about videotaping stuff, good and bad. We did crazy stuff. But when we first started out, that was our band. We wanted to videotape our practices because we wanted to see how it sounded. And one thing led to another. My childhood buddy ended up working for Channel 13 as a videographer.
Yeah.
And another buddy was involved in media, and I got involved in wedding videography. And, we all ended up doing things along that line. I got a great story, and I'll end it with this. This is one of the funny things that happened. In high school, in Pelham High School in Birmingham, Alabama, is now mostly known for one person. His name is Dabo Sweeney. Okay. Dabo Sweeney, of course, the head coach, Clemson, was one of my classmates as I was in high school. He was younger. His brother was in my class. And so anyway, me and my buddies, we like to film stuff. So one day we decide we're going to film high school, right? We're going to rent those big cameras with a VHS on. And we would take turns, and you take it for a class and I'll get it later. And we would do that all day, and we filmed all day long. And then I put that out, I don't know, 10 years ago on YouTube or something. And ended up, people just watch it because it's a time capsule. Yeah. So they don't even, it's not their school, but they identify with it. So it's got like 80,000 views or something like that. It's crazy. So anyway, one of the class reunions comes up, and they contact me. And I can't go because I got a gig, and a pretty important gig. So I didn't go. But Dabo comes. And I hadn't seen Dabo. I think I saw him at the last one maybe, but I can't remember. Anyway, I wasn't there. And Dabo's there. Of course, he's now famous, right?
Now he wants to find you because you got him on video doing something.
See, this is the funny thing. He didn't know this, right? I didn't actually have video of him, but I had the videos I shot in high school. Mm. Well, they asked me, can we use your video to show as a thing during our class presentation?
Yeah.
you know, as a surprise.
Sure.
And so apparently they showed it, and Dabo Swinney cried. Well, he was watching my video, and he was like, "Who did this?" And they're like, "Jeff Goebel." Really? They're like, yeah. So that was kind of like the funny thing that I found out about Dabo Swinney since he's become famous. But yeah, you just never know what you're capturing, man.
Yeah, that's
you know,
that's true.
You never know what you're capturing. And with David and with Mark Phillips, my friend Mark, I mean, it's such an important thing that I'll go back and watch myself.
Yeah.
About that day that we went and sat with him in his studio, and he told me his story and all the little stories about his thing in the music business, and you were with David, and I heard some of the stories he was telling, you know. Some of them I knew. Yeah. You know. It's just great to do, man. And I appreciate you having me down and
yes, sir.
doing it. So thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. We're going to cut this off here. And like I said, thanks again for coming, man. I really appreciate it. You really do me a favor.
Sure. I'm not doing you a favor. You're doing me a favor, man.
All right,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.